Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Betty was still asleep. She had come home late the night before and said something about a friend's birthday party, though no one had asked her where she had been, but for some reason it seemed important to justify herself. Probably she remembered those times when her husband thought she was an ordinary girl who had no money or connections, but they were attracted to each other. Oh, those days are gone. Liam, as usual, took a contrast shower, wiped himself thoroughly with a towel, and began the most unpleasant part of his awakening. He leaned closer to the mirror, scrutinizing his reflection. This morning ritual had always been difficult for him, with fear. In fact, the tension grew with each passing year. Suddenly you will click the first marks of time on your own attractive face. What then? Good looks are everything, Liam used to say. True, it usually referred to work, because not fresh wrinkled flour is difficult to sell. You have to dodge to make them look freshly cut, but recently he more and more often repeated this simple truth in relation to himself. People are like flowers too. You have to work hard to keep them young and beautiful. Liam looked at himself again and grinned at his mirror double. Not bad, perhaps. He had bought another day against time. Good job, Liam. Way to go. Of course you can't hide your age. 40 is 40, and it's hard to look like a reverent young man, but it's for the best. After all, boys without mustaches are not trusted, neither in work nor in relationships. Even girls, yesterday's schoolgirls proudly declare that they like older men, but right, older, it is in their understanding smarter, more reliable, well, and with money, of course. In general, quite a reasonable choice, a man in his prime. Here he is in the pair itself. All the features of his face have retained clarity without becoming coarse. The contours are in order. The color of his face is fresh. This is, of course, the merit of an excellent beautician, but he himself is also good. Regimen, discipline, and zero indulgence to himself, that's it, the secret of his youth. Does not drink. Forced himself to say goodbye to cigarettes, plus a healthy diet, good sleep, and regular exercise. Sometimes, of course, you want to send all that correctness away. Eat a lot of junk food, drink a beer. You can't. His job is to look good, so healthy lifestyle, beautician, and of course, hairdresser. At the thought of the latter, Liam pulled himself a strand of hair to assess the condition of the roots. Yes, his freshly chalked hair had already grown out. It was time to visit the hairdresser. The usual, Liam? Lauren chirped. To her, and only her, Liam trusted his hair for the 5th year. Don't ask, Lauren. You know better than I do. He answered, giving the barber one of his most charming smiles. Just don't overdo it, okay? It should look natural, like you've been sunbathing on the beach and your hair is slightly burned out. Remember? I remember, my good man, I remember. Lauren ruffled his hair. Let's start with a deep clean. What's up, sweetie? He waved his hand tiredly. Oh, Lauren, how can I be doing with a job like this? Those who claim it's easy to live off women are either brazen liars or simply don't know what they're talking about. He considered his job to be one of the most difficult in the world and was ready to argue about it with anyone who disagreed. For some reason, everyone thinks that being married to a wealthy, well-groomed lady is Jack's sweat of a lifetime. But Liam knew very well that these ridiculous rumors were spread by those who didn't know the real truth. Liam's wife Betty was wealthy. She had her ex-husband to thank for that, who had not gotten greedy in the divorce, and beautiful enough for her advanced age. But Liam, being with such a lady, who provided him with an excellent paying job, lived in eternal fear that if he got bored with his beautiful wife, she would easily replace him with someone else, which meant that he would fly out of her luxurious apartment penniless. The prospect is hurtful and humiliating, so whether he wanted it or not, Liam found himself included in the pursuit of attractiveness. Cosmetologists, massage therapists, fitness trainers, all of this has long been a familiar, albeit expensive, part of his life. But external attractiveness is not enough. Liam has learned how to give beautiful compliments without repeating himself. He perfected the art of love and even learned to watch with his wife her favorite melodramas, and still, every day he began with anxiety for the future, which was uncertain as well as the present. They say teenagers are driven by hormones, and that's why they have a bad temper, nasty to the extreme, but 17-year-old Thomas was an unusual teenager. At least that's what Helen, a charmingly slutty neighbor of about 35 who was despised by all married women, always told him. Mainly, of course, for the fact that it was she, the shameless and promiscuous Helen, that their husbands looked up to. The arrival of shameless Helen in their house was a real event. No one wanted to miss it, and the neighbors poured into the yard under various pretexts. Someone pretended that he urgently needed to wash his car, someone that it would be good to dust the carpets. Others just sat down on benches to chat and exchange news, but it was all just an act. In fact, everyone wanted to know what the new neighbor looked like, especially since rumors were spreading at the speed of light in their tiny town. Some noticed the strange woman in the store, others saw her strolling along the waterfront. So far, everyone knew only one thing: the stranger was young, beautiful, and excitingly lonely. At any rate, everywhere she appeared alone. When it turned out that the empty apartment on the second floor was finally rented out, no one had any doubts about who would move in. Thomas had only seen such a frenzy during the May holidays, when neighbors gathered all over the world, first at dachas for shish kebabs, and then for parades. Then people were just as concentratedly scurrying back and forth on the stairs, wives shouting something to their husbands from the balconies, and husbands crowding around, discussing important matters, how much meat and booze to take to the dacha to be sure to have enough. Thomas never thought that such a pre-holiday fuss could arise in quite, as it seemed to him, prosaic reasons, like the arrival of a new neighbor. But first of all, the furniture was being hauled by some men who didn't look like movers. Their clothes were too neat, and it was clear from their conversations that they were just helping their good acquaintance. Secondly, the new neighbor came in a tiny turquoise-colored car, with some intricate airbrush on the doors, whether paradise was depicted there, or just some tropics, the ocean shore, the setting sun. And thirdly, when this very door with the painted paradise opened, some absolutely alien person, boyishly slender, with long blonde hair, braided in an unusual, slightly disheveled braid, came out of the cabin. The tips of her hair were dyed in a fierce pink color, and the girl, who at first glance seemed to be a girl, waved her hand cheerfully to her new neighbors and shouted cheerfully, "Good morning." Yes, she is about 30 years old, if not more. Thomas's mom gritted her teeth. She stood in the yard, not far from her son, and pretended that she was just out for some fresh air. "How do you know?" Thomas whispered in surprise, "Look at the wrinkles." "Where?" "Under her eyes, you fool. When he smiles, his skin folds up like a crocodile's, and he's got freckles on his nose. You hillbilly." Thomas carefully looked at her face and did not see anything crocodile in it. If she had wrinkles, no one noticed them, but she smiled really well, openly and very warmly, and even freckles did not spoil this sunny impression. On the contrary, they even strengthened it, because if the stranger had a perfectly porcelain skin, it would be difficult to perceive her as a living woman, not a work of art. And the crocodile took her backpack out of the car, threw it on her shoulder, and walked lightly to the entrance. On her feet, as Thomas noticed, were snow-white sneakers. The men turned to follow her, but quickly came to their senses when they heard their wives hissing in displeasure. The hissing did not subside even after a week since the Apokel event. It was said that there was a brave man who dropped in on the new girl and offered to help her if she needed it. The pretty neighbor politely thanked the brave man and offered him a cup of tea and crumpets, but then some neighbor appeared on the landing. In a minute the wife of the desperate was already here, and the neighbors behind the locked doors listened for a long time to the shrieking and selected swear words. The essence of them, of course, was to censure unscrupulous women who had no husband and could not have one, and therefore offered tea to other people's spouses. They also censured men's malleability and promiscuity, because of which any lousy goat is ready to exchange his faithful and respectable wife for the first girl he sees. The scratch marks on the daredevil's face, as well as the impressive black eye, served as a warning to the others for a long time. The new neighbor did not comment on the situation, which made her even more famous as a brazen seductress. All that was learned, the name of this mysterious person was Helen, and she was apparently unmarried. There were different rumors about her. Someone said that shameless Helen in her youth was a prostitute and from the elite, and by 27 and 30 accumulated a hefty sum, which will allow her to live to old age without needing anything. This version was especially liked by women because it allowed them not to envy the neighbor, but to treat her with some leniency. Others assured that she still had some super-rich patron who gave her a decent monthly allowance. This version was less common, if only because there had never been any super-rich patrons in their town, and if there had been, they would have preferred to send their favorites away from here to avoid being the subject of gossip. But as was usually the case, no one knew for sure. The human hive was buzzing, inventing more and more crazy versions. The degree of hatred was rising, and it seemed to Thomas very strange. After all, Helen behaved very modestly, never once even tried to flirt with other men's husbands. But when going to the store, she always asked her neighbors if they needed anything. When a lonely neighbor, retired Betty, broke her femoral neck and spent almost a month in the hospital, it was shameless Helen who visited her with bags of goodies. And she also took to the veterinary clinic a stray backyard cat that had been seriously mauled by dogs. The cat needed surgery, and Helen paid for it without saying a word, and then took the poor cat to herself. Thomas, then a 16-year-old boy, observing the discontent of neighbors, only marveled. Why were they so unfair to this beautiful and kind woman? Especially women were fierce about it, and after thinking about it, Thomas came to the conclusion that it was all about ordinary human envy. Their house, their neighborhood, although considered one of the most prosperous in the city, but in fact there lived the most ordinary people. Women who were young and had first love got married at the age of 18 or 20. By the time they were 24, they had a couple of kids. At 27, they thought they were already out of circulation. They had tired eyes and early coarsened hands. They were used to thinking first of their children, then of their husbands, and only last of themselves. These women were young and beautiful, bent under the burden of self-denial, discarded in a kind of pagan fanaticism everything that they considered superfluous and too costly: beauty, youth, health. By 30 they had already blurred, changed into tracksuits for a long time, and tied their dull hair, which had lost its luster, into ugly bunches. They were, in general, glorious women. They loved their loved ones and dreamed of a better life for their children. Only one thing nature had not measured them for: a sliver of normal human selfishness. It was completely unnoticed as long as everyone around them was like themselves, but when the shameless Helen appeared in the house with her insultingly contented smile, gentle hands, and groomed hair, the women became offended. It became even more offensive when it turned out that shameless Helen was not 25, but 10 years older. And they did not realize that Helen was beautiful, not in spite of them, but simply because she was used to spending time and money on herself. Helen wore youthful clothes, and the most unpleasant thing was that they suited her. Helen had no children or nephews, and when tired young mothers dragged their sleepy children to kindergarten, Helen walked her French bulldog Curabier on a leash, and Helen never carried poodle bags from supermarkets. And never once did she look glum, resentful, or tired, which was a shame, because it turned out that she didn't have to devote herself entirely to others and forget about herself. "I hate her, such a slut." Thomas's mother panted, frantically ragging the windows with a rag. Thomas knew that if his mother was cleaning the windows, she was in a bad mood, to say the least. Usually she left this tedious task to her husband or son, and if she did it herself, that was it. His father had a premonition of bad weather and tried to sneak out to the garage early in the morning. Thomas' nature in such an unmistakable flare denied, so that had to watch the mother explosions of resentment and if possible try to dispel them. Judging by the way his mother was furiously rubbing the window pane, it was not going well. And of course, the sight of shameless Helen, carelessly walking her Curabier, did not add to her good mood. No worries, no troubles, and plenty of money, why not take care of her beauty? Her clothes are so light, but how can you wear them in our dust? Only if you take them off at home and throw them in the garbage, because the closets are full of new ones. Oh, old fool, she's still at it, jumping around like a goat. Ah, it's disgusting to look at her. Thomas glanced cautiously out the window from behind his mother's shoulder. The neighbor was indeed dressed in a tight white t-shirt and pink jeans, rolled up at the ankles. Her sneakers were still the same defiantly white, standing out against the green grass. Thomas liked the tight t-shirt best of all, and it wasn't that the neighbor's shape was so strikingly large, but rather the opposite. The size could have been added, but it was so nice to see the chiseled shoulders, the flexible waist, and the tanned skin in the low neckline. Even from afar, it seemed that Helen gave off a wonderful smell of purity and some young freshness. "Get away from me. What are you looking at?" Her mother noticed Thomas staring at the woman and waved the rag at him. "Get out of here. She's not the one to seduce the children, you wretch. Why do you all hate her so much?" Thomas couldn't take it anymore. "What's she doing wrong? She lives and lives. What does she live on?" Instantly the mother parried. She turned to her son, and her face breathed such a fierce, unconcealed hatred that Thomas was frightened for a moment. "Hadn't you thought of that? She doesn't go to work. She doesn't have a husband, but she has men coming and going, sometimes 2 in one day. Do you understand now how she earns her bread?" She looked hopefully at her son, expecting to see disgust or indignation on his face, or preferably both, but Thomas disappointed her. He shrugged indifferently and turned away from the window. "But he earns money. That's a job too, Mom." He reached out to take the rag from her. "You go get some rest, and I'll clean the window myself." "Yeah, you've got another idea." Mother snorted. "You don't want to clean the windows. You want to look at that shameless girl. That's all I need. Go and get some bread and a bottle of sunflower oil." Thomas obediently went into the hallway and found his dusty sneakers in the shoe rack. Once they were trivial white, but now they were striking unusual grayish-brown coloring, which means to walk on the city dust. Not every city has such, but they have, you can say, a business card of the settlement. Thomas slowly walked down the stairs, thinking about the conversation with his mother, about how little interesting things happen in their town if a pretty woman becomes a subject of increased and aggressive attention at the same time. And most of all, he thought about the white t-shirt of his neighbor. He wondered how she managed to wear white in this beastly dust. With Helen, he bumped into her right at the very entrance. Kurabir looked up at Thomas with bright, round eyes and yapped in greeting. "Hello, Kurabir," said Thomas, and bent down to pet the funny little animal. He wanted to say something to his mistress, but he wanted to say something witty, something that would surprise her or make her laugh, but nothing came into his head, so he had to limit himself to mumbling. "Hello. Hello, Thomas," she smiled warmly. "Aren't you going to the store that way?" He brightened up. "Can I get you anything?" "If you say the word, I'll be right back." "Get me some salt," the woman asked. "Let me give you some money now." No. Thomas was getting restless. "I don't want money, but if you offer me tea, I'll take it." "Then I've already offered it," she answered, and in Thomas's ears, these words sounded like wonderful music. He never heard Helen, amazed at the speed with which he had sprinted out of the entryway, muttered. If, of course, it was safe to do so, but Thomas was flying on wings to the store, thinking only that in 20 minutes he would be having tea with the most charming woman he had ever seen in his 15-year life. On this occasion, he made a promise to himself that from now on and forever he would consider himself lucky. He would get what all men from 14 to 90 could only dream of, and maybe even today would be the end of his childhood, because if his mother was telling the truth, Thomas was not a slacker on vacation, and he had worked almost all summer as a courier, so his savings could be enough, if, of course, she agreed. At the mere thought, his heart rate was giving out in such a way that Thomas seriously feared he would collapse unconscious right in front of Helen's apartment door. His palms were getting traitorously damp, and his back was already wet with sweat. Hell, if this was going to work out, he'd have to shower first thing. He rang the bell. Helen opened the door immediately, and Thomas was stunned to see her in her house clothes. His mother, like the mothers of all his friends, wore bathrobes at home, or at best some shapeless pajamas, which they proudly called homemade suits. Such suits looked good only on the day of purchase, and then on mannequins, and on ordinary women thin jersey, emphasized all the imperfections, loose hips and weeping, lost elasticity belly. And the neighbor was wearing a beautiful blue with a white ruffle sundress, tied at the waist with a beautiful blue ribbon. Her hair was carelessly pinned at the back of her head, leaving a few strands of it loose around her face. Where did she come from? "I brought you some salt," Thomas stammered. At the thought that everything forbidden, adult, would happen now, everything inside him froze. Helen smiled and stepped aside to let him into the apartment. I had already set the table. In the hallway at the feet of the guest, rolled out from somewhere a fat, funny-looking Kurabir. Thomas, blushing painfully, followed the hostess into the kitchen. Once inside the coveted apartment alone with this vicious, jubilant woman, he was completely confused. Just a minute ago, it seemed that he should only get here and everything would happen by itself, but now, he wondered, they would have tea, and then what? How does it happen with women like that? Do you have to tell her why you're here? Or maybe she'll figure it out on her own. And how do you negotiate the price? What if it's too high? What if he doesn't have that much? And most importantly, how to make sure Helen didn't guess that she was his first? Thomas was tormented by these questions, while the neighbor was pouring tea and thinking about how wonderful it would be if this woman was, well, just a woman, not a prostitute, and that she just liked him that way. Then he would put his hands on her waist, her back to him now, and slowly kiss her bare neck, and maybe try it. And Thomas, trying to stop the trembling in his arms, came closer and put his arms around Helen's narrow waist. Now he could smell her perfume, thin, fresh, with some elusive bitterness. He wanted to lean forward to inhale it fully. Helen froze for a second, but immediately flinched when she felt his hot breath on her neck. "Get away," she said, "or I'll spill from the kettle." He obeyed immediately and immediately removed his hands. "I'm sorry." He mumbled, "I feel either offended or ashamed. It's just that people say that about you. That I'm a prostitute and men come to me." "Calm down," she said. "Helen, sitting down." "I know, sit down." Thomas sat down and picked up a cup. Helen's tea was special too. It smelled of some strange herbs and familiar lemon, and for some reason a little chocolate candy. "It's not true what they say," he said. "Gossip, they always lie." The woman shrugged. "But men do come to see me," she said without the slightest embarrassment. "Only they have a different interest in me." Thomas looked at her with interest. Slowly his composure returned. "Do you really sell moonshine?" he asked in surprise. Helen laughed. Her teeth were like pearls, large, even, shiny. "No, Thomas," she said. "I'm a dressmaker. I make men's suits. I used to work in an atelier, but I make more money this way. Would you like to see? Come on." She led him into a room where there were several mannequins. One of them had an orange centimeter tape around his neck, and in the middle of the room was a table covered with patterns. By the window, where there was more light, was a sewing machine. "Oh my God," Thomas blurted out. "Is it really that easy?" Helen took the centimeter and deftly rolled it up. "You see how it is," she said. "They say a hell of a lot of things, but in fact it's very, very simple, boring even. Have you seen the movie with Monica Bellucci, calls Melina herself? It's also about such things, about gossip. Watch it if you want. It's interesting." Thomas left his neighbor's apartment thoughtful and sad, and it was not because the shameless Helen was not a mysterious priestess of love, but an ordinary worker. Just then he thought for the first time in his life about how evil people can be. And due to his young age, he did not realize that their anger is not from the heart, but from exhaustion, hopelessness, and constant spinning in a dull squirrel wheel. From then on, a sort of friendship developed between the 15-year-old boy and the grown woman. Thomas would often drop in for tea with Helen, and they would talk at length. Little by little, Thomas got to know her better, and now this woman's life and her journey became clearer to him. Helen had been born far away from here, in a lazy southern backwater where snow fell a couple of times during the winter and melted the next day. But there were apricot trees, and their sweet fragrance mingled with the bitter smell of wormwood. The stars on summer nights were so low that it seemed that you could reach out your hand and take a sparkle from the sky. Pin it on your dress like a brooch, and you'd be the prettiest girl on the street. "You know, Thomas," said Helen dreamily, "I sometimes think that's why I became a dressmaker. Because of this southern summer sky, I so dreamed of a dress the color of night, and that the star, here, on the shoulder, that even learned to sew because of it." The girl lived with her parents and grandmother, and then at her disposal was a small house with a front garden. Just her grandmother with age became hard to bear the heat, and then her parents decided to move her to the dacha. It was cooler there after all. In order not to leave the old lady alone, they moved there themselves, especially since Helen was not alone after all. Across the street lived her father's cousin, Uncle James and his wife, Aunt Clara, and their countless brood of 17 to 2-year-olds. At first, Helen found it a little scary to spend the night and to live it all alone in an empty house, but little by little she got used to it, and then she liked it. After all, there were many advantages to being free. In time, Helen even began to be proud of the fact that she was now, you could say, quite an adult, even living separately from her parents and not reporting to anyone where she went and what time she would return home. Moreover, there was always somewhere to go. You could go to visit any of the neighbors and sit up late talking. Or, if your soul wanted silence and solitude, you could take a walk along the seashore. And just during one of such walks, Helen met her Liam. It was late fall, she recalled, and it was windy, the sky was dark as before a storm, seagulls were scurrying back and forth, shouting at them. And suddenly I saw him sitting on the rocks, long, curly, and thin, as if he hadn't eaten for a month. His eyes were big, you couldn't see from the light. His eyelashes were so long and thick, you could paint pictures of him, and he was a romantic, reading a book, and the wind was ruffling the pages. It's not true what they say. He said, "Gossip, they always lie." The woman shrugged, "But men do come to see me." She said without the slightest embarrassment, "Only they have a different interest in me." Thomas looked at her with interest. Slowly his composure returned. "Do you really sell moonshine?" he asked in surprise. Helen laughed. Her teeth were like pearls, large, even, shiny. "No, Thomas," she said. "I'm a dressmaker. I make men's suits. I used to work in an atelier, but I make more money this way. Would you like to see?" "Come on." She led him into a room where there were several mannequins. One of them had an orange centimeter tape around his neck, and in the middle of the room was a table covered with patterns. By the window, where there was more light, was a sewing machine. "Oh my God," Thomas blurted out. "Is it really that easy?" Helen took the centimeter and deftly rolled it up. "You see how it is," she said. "They say a hell of a lot of things, but in fact, it's very, very simple, boring even. Have you seen the movie with Monica Bellucci, called Melina Herself? It's also about such things, about gossip. Watch it if you want. It's interesting." Thomas left his neighbor's apartment thoughtful and sad. And it was not because the shameless Helen was not a mysterious priestess of love, but an ordinary worker. Just then he thought for the first time in his life about how evil people can be. And due to his young age, he did not realize that their anger is not from the heart, but from exhaustion, hopelessness, and constant spinning in a dull squirrel wheel. From then on, a sort of friendship developed between the 15-year-old boy and the grown woman. Thomas would often drop in for tea with Helen, and they would talk at length. Little by little, Thomas got to know her better, and now this woman's life and her journey became clearer to him. Helen had been born far away from here, in a lazy southern backwater where snow fell a couple of times during the winter and melted the next day. But there were apricot trees, and their sweet fragrance mingled with the bitter smell of wormwood. The stars on summer nights were so low that it seemed that you could reach out your hand and take a sparkle from the sky. Pin it on your dress like a brooch, and you'd be the prettiest girl on the street. "You know, Thomas," said Helen dreamily. "I sometimes think that's why I became a dressmaker. Because of this southern summer sky, I so dreamed of a dress the color of night, and that the star, here, on the shoulder, that even learned to sew because of it. The girl lived with her parents and grandmother, and then at her disposal was a small house with a front garden. Just her grandmother with age became hard to bear the heat, and then her parents decided to move her to the dacha. It was cooler there after all. In order not to leave the old lady alone, they moved there themselves, especially since Helen was not alone after all. Across the street lived her father's cousin, Uncle James and his wife, Aunt Clara, and their countless brood of 17 to 2-year-olds. At first, Helen found it a little scary to spend the night, and to live it all alone in an empty house, but little by little she got used to it, and then she liked it. After all, there were many advantages to being free. In time, Helen even began to be proud of the fact that she was now, you could say, quite an adult, even living separately from her parents and not reporting to anyone where she went and what time she would return home. Moreover, there was always somewhere to go. You could go to visit any of the neighbors and sit up late talking. Or, if your soul wanted silence and solitude, you could take a walk along the seashore. And just during one of such walks, Helen met her Liam. It was late fall, she recalled, and it was windy. The sky was dark as before a storm. Seagulls were scurrying back and forth, shouting at them. And suddenly I saw him sitting on the rocks, long, curly and thin, as if he hadn't eaten for a month. His eyes were big. You couldn't see from the light. His eyelashes were so long and thick. You could paint pictures of him, and he was a romantic, reading a book, and the wind was ruffling the pages. I thought he was reading poetry, but he looked at me and smiled. And that's when a 17-year-old girl fell in love for the first time. As always, at that age, without thinking, without calculating, and it seemed forever. I thought it was the end of my freedom as a girl. What kind of freedom is there when you're in love like that? Only to get married. Liam, however, did not share her zeal. It seemed to him that Helen's ideas about life were too simple and uncomplicated. The boy was ambitious and decided that his place was in the big city. "That's where the future is, Helen," he said, kissing his beloved's flaxen hair. "We can't stay here. We'll be like Uncle James and Aunt Clara." "Is that what you want?" Helen shuddered at the words. Uncle James was a frail man, barely over 40, but looking a shabby 50. Alcohol and lack of demand were to blame. He'd once worked at a horse club, and no one was better at getting along with any horse, even the most stubborn. He taught kids to ride and was paid handsomely for his skills. But then one of the local bosses bought the club and offered Uncle James to teach riding to his fat friends. Uncle James couldn't bring himself to accept. He hated the suddenly rich, yesterday's hooligans with whom he grew up on the same street, but only they suddenly, out of the blue, suddenly began to build themselves whole palaces, although yesterday they were caught shoplifting. So Uncle James was out of work and started drinking. His wife, Aunt Clara, was rumored to have been beautiful once, but it was impossible to see the former beauty in the now immense aunt, with a large and dark wart on her nose. She had once worked in a cafe, but when she realized her husband would no longer find a living, she had taken up baking to order. Aunt Clara always wore huge robes covered in dough and cream stains. Her hands were always covered in flour, and her face was always bright red from the oven being on. The numerous screaming offspring of Uncle James and Aunt Clara, and from morning till night, there was no one to look after the children. In the evenings, Aunt Clara would come out on the threshold of the family home, sit down heavily on the porch, and sit so long. From the absent expression on her face, one could guess that she was simply enjoying these infrequent moments of peace and quiet. Then Uncle James came out, swaying, and gently touched his wife's loose shoulder. "Let's go to bed, Clara." Quietly, he would say, and the woman would rise from the porch and go into the house. Helen's heart clenched with pity for this haggard, tired woman who must have long ago forgotten that she was a woman and her own, unrelated to the family's welfare desires. The words I want had no place in her life. There used to be, of course, but they had been superseded, wiped out to blackness, and then to complete invisibility. There was only one solid thing going around. I must. When Helen tells the story, I went up to her one day and asked, "Aunt Clara, is there anything you need help with? While I'm on vacation, I can make you dough and roll it out thinly, and I'll make you a cream that you'll lick your fingers. Or do you want me to look after the younger kids? We'll go to the sea and swim, and you'll take it easy." And I'm saying all this, I realize I'm talking nonsense. It's not the right thing to do. It's wrong. I don't know how to do it right. And Aunt Clara looked at me as if she didn't immediately understand what I was saying, and then she grinned and said, "It is better to go out while you are young, but don't hurry to get married. You will always have time to go there. But from there." But I was a girl. I didn't listen to her. Helen's favorite boy soon rushed to a huge city and promised that in a year he would come and take her away. Letters from him came often at first, almost every day, then once every couple weeks, then once a month. He still promised that he would take Helen with him, but not as confidently as before. Then the letters had the feeling that Helen was for Liam, no longer the beloved girl he longed for passionately, but something of an obligation. Finally, without waiting for the year to end, Helen herself went to her lover to sort things out. But having arrived, she did not find him at the address indicated on the envelope. To be more precise, no one opened the door for her. The neighbor said that the boy is rarely at home. Helen sat on the steps for almost 24 hours waiting for her beloved. When Liam finally arrived, he was noisily happy to see the girl. "Shall we go home?" he announced. "What about it? You wanted opportunity, didn't you? You didn't want to be like Uncle James and Aunt Clara." The boy brushed it off. "I've realized a lot of things, Helen. I'd rather be like them than here, running around like a stray dog with no one to help you. At home, you walk down the street and everyone knows you. Whoever you go to will put you at the table and feed you well. But here, Helen, no one needs you. And people here are strangers, cold. You look like they're dressed well and don't talk stupidly, but their eyes are empty, like glass. And what did you agree to?" Thomas asked. "I did," Helen sighed. "And we went back to our streets, to our acquaintances, to Aunt Clara and Uncle James, married almost immediately." "Liam? His name was Liam, my husband, did I tell you?" "I guess he was happy. He got a job in a store selling beer on tap, made a decent living. Alcoholics, they'd give their last drink, so I didn't do nothing. I learned to sew well. We thought about children, but Liam thought, and for some reason I didn't want to hurry. Probably because I'd seen enough of Aunt Clara. Anyway, we lived peacefully, but a bit boring. It was a sleepy town, but when the season starts, then there's some excitement, and from fall to late spring it's boring. We're both at work during the day. In the evening we have dinner together, watch TV and go to sleep. On the weekends we go to the beach, if it's summer, or to the movies. And I'm so bored. I sit here in the evenings and think, even though I don't have kids, I'm just like my Aunt Clara. I also sit on the porch in the evening and look empty, because I know what will happen tomorrow and what will happen the day after tomorrow. I know that too, and the month after that too. So I realize that it is not in the children she trouble, and not even in the fact that the husband drinks and just routine eats, monotony and routine. I decided that it's time for us to leave here until completely rotten, but my no way, I just start talking, and he is already waving his hands at me. Don't start, I've already tried that. You're talking about boredom, but you've never seen real boredom. Nobody needs you there. You live like an anthill, and nobody cares about you. It's like that. Where I was born, therein came in handy. To make a long story short, but I'm stubborn. I'll be quiet for a week, and then I'll cast my fishing rod again. Sooner or later, and the fish will bite, and the man he is from the same fish in this regard, not so different. Be patient, and do not give up in the face of difficulties. Then sooner or later you will achieve your goal. I do not even remember how many times I have already asked Liam, let's try again. Let's move to a big city, and there are already 2 of us. It would be easier with 2, so I asked, and finally he agreed. We are packing, I remember, and suddenly Aunt Clara, but it never happened. She came to visit. She's looking at our bags, looking at them. I was waiting for her to drop a word, but she kept silent, sitting there drinking tea and watching me shoving the last one into the bags. And then he drank his tea, and then he said, "You're running from the wrong place, Helen, and to the wrong place." So she left without saying anything else, and I didn't think about her words. Why should I? At that time it seemed to me that I knew better where to run to and from. The next day we moved out. Liam's husband seemed to accept, but not cheerful, and I do not care. I think, well, here we are out of the swamp and crawled out. Now we will live. Of course, no one was waiting for us there, but it's kind of okay. I got a job in an atelier. My husband went to a computer hardware store as a consultant. He was even interested. He learned a lot of new things. It's not beer diluted with water. We seem to be living all right. There is no fun, but there is no boredom either. It's a different environment, different people. Yes, while you get to know the city, even that time will pass, and it's just that the people there are quicker, so they all run around, tearing their shoes off on the run. And the main thing is that they always have something to do, and we are used to living in such a relaxed way. Well, all in all, it wasn't bad. I, however, began to realize that my husband is not the same passion, and we with him spread out, or something, in different directions. Even in a simple thing, before under one blanket slept under one blanket, and it was good for us. But here we wrap each in his own, as you know, caterpillars, silkworms, and each in his cocoon sits. I even began to think that maybe it's really time for us to have a baby. We'll have such a common care. It also brings us closer, but I thought about it too long. I had to think faster, because the word of my spouse in this life, there are already quite other interests, not related to me. Rumors began to reach me, because my atelier was right in front of his store, and there on the first floor was a cafe, snack bar. Girls from the atelier ran there for snacks. They told me an amazing story that my virtuous husband had found someone. The girl, and he said, well, quite young, maybe 18 years old, and I was already 30. So it was a shame, wasn't it? Well, she was pretty, like a doll. I saw her. Her face was narrow, but her eyes were half her face and blue. It's creepy. It's such a pure color. Her lips are a bow. Her hair is red with gold, and it's long all the way down to her waist, shorter and curly. She's so beautiful. How could I compare to her? Thomas, admiring Helen, thought that she was in vain. He himself had never seen a woman who seemed more beautiful to him, but the neighbor continued. Liam, he went crazy about her. He would come home and look at me, but he couldn't see me. I try to say something to him, but he doesn't hear. Then he wakes up somehow, remembers that I'm here, looks at me and asks me in a surprised way, "Hey, did you say something?" Well, I tolerated it. Then once I went to my husband in the store, and there it means it. Well, she in general. She saw me, of course they were scared, but I'm a grown man. Why should I fight with a little girl? She had nothing to be scared of. Lime immediately picked himself up, thought, probably, that there would be a scandal now, but I took the girl aside and calmly told her, "Why don't you like yourself so much, little one? After all, you're so beautiful young, but with someone else's husband, is there no single guy for you in such a big city? Or do you think that Liam is walking away from me and you won't? And what about her?" Thomas asked. Helen smiled. "What about her?" she cried, of course, up to her swollen nose. Maybe she was ashamed, or maybe she was angry with him and me. I took her to that cafe on the first floor, got her a coffee and a cake. Well, I felt sorry for the girl. She made a mistake, so why blame her now? Who doesn't when they're young? So she calmed down, stopped sobbing, and then she told me. She said that Liam loves her, but it's understandable, and that he loves her too, and it's also understandable, but the next part was interesting. He said he wanted to leave, but he couldn't decide to leave me, because I didn't work and had never worked, and I didn't work because I was sick through and through, and he supported me. And then this miracle with a swollen nose says to me, "You're going to die soon anyway, so let him be happy." Liam told her in her ears that his sick wife had no more than a year to live, and then they would get married. So she came home, sat down, and sat there. I don't know what to do. I was thinking about my home, and I was thinking about the fact that the apricots were probably ripe and sweet as honey. About how Aunt Clara can bake such baklava, I've never tasted better in my life. But the recipe, I was such a fool, I never asked her. For some reason I remembered Aunt Clara, the very same Aunt Clara. So I wanted to talk to her, at least to hear her voice. I don't know how I found her phone, so I called her. Aunt Clara recognized me at once and started asking me where I lived and how I was doing. But then, of course, I began to describe to her, and what a beautiful city it is here, and what a view I have from the window to die for, and that my husband and I live well, and there is plenty of work and a lot of money paid for it. In general, I lied Thomas, long and inspired, and during all this time Aunt Clara did not interrupt me once, and then waited until I closed my mouth for a minute. And then she went off without any preamble. "Now tell me the truth." Well, I had to tell the truth about my husband's Liam, about his beautiful mistress, and about what he told her about me, and I'm crying. I don't understand why I'm crying. It was not that I was offended that my husband had strayed, but the fact that I had been trying for my family for so many years, I had settled down somehow, and then a girl appeared, and I was to be thrown into the garbage. Like garbage? Aunt Clara says to me, "Do you remember I warned you? Don't be in a hurry, you're getting married. So you didn't listen to me and married the first one who looked at you. Come on, don't mention it now. If you love your husband, then don't care. He'll have a good time there, and then he'll come back to you. But I'm telling you right away, then he'll go off again, that's for sure. If you don't love him, pack your bags. You don't need him." Aunt Clara had always been like that, a little wordy. She didn't like long conversations, but if she said anything, it was always to the point. We said goodbye, I drank some valerian, went to bed, and I thought, do I love Liam or not? It turned out that it was unclear whether I loved him or not, but where could I put my habit? I definitely had a habit for him, a strong one. When it seemed that no, I was addicted to him. I couldn't tear him away from me. I shouldn't even try. I lay there falling asleep, and I didn't find the answers to my questions, so I fell asleep, all confused and torn. I woke up in the night from the fact that the silence is so silent that it seems to ring in the air. A taut string is felt, and it is already dark. My husband was sleeping next to me, and he couldn't care less. Everything seemed so mundane or trivial to me. It's like it's just the way it is. I'd even thought that maybe I was just dreaming. Helen was silent for a long time. And then, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. Did you never leave him? No, she answered, looking as if she was surprised at herself. I didn't. Lion woke up too, and we talked all night and into the morning. He apologized, told me more precisely, even swore that he had no true feelings for that girl, that it was just a joke, and that it would never happen again. He even offered to go home again, go back to a place where life was easier. I was not very much against it. I realized that here, it turns out, the matter is what, even in a big city, or in a hut on the forest edge, and everywhere life is about the same. And if it's boring, it's because of us. So Aunt Clara was right when she told me that I was running to the wrong place. We slowly started to go home. We didn't want to hurry, and there was no need to. We decided that we'd be back just in time for Christmas. We'll clean our house. I'll cook delicious food. We'll sit down on our favorite sofa, and as before, we'll wrap ourselves in one blanket for two. We'll drink champagne and talk. I even imagined it, but it didn't quite work out. When we arrived, Aunt Clara was in black and couldn't stop crying. I went to her, and she told me that Uncle James, her husband, had died. He went to the sea drunk, as usual, to take a dip, and he drowned. That's how we spent Christmas at the memorial table. And then Aunt Clara told me that Uncle James, well, he was a difficult man, a surprise. He left the equestrian club, but he wrote down all his observations, developments, everything he knew about horses, what he had learned in notebooks. And the new owner of the club found them and decided to publish a textbook for those who are interested. And the textbook went viral, and this owner, and he was a decent man, came to Aunt Clara and said that all the uncles of James, posthumous royalties will be deducted to her, and the royalties there were not bad, believe me. At the wake this host was also there. I saw him then for the first time and was very surprised. For some reason I thought that there was such an old man nasty, but it turned out to be a normal man, even handsome. But the point is, we mourned our Uncle James and went on with our lives. It was hard for Aunt Clara. I went to see her every day, where I distracted her from her grief by talking, where I helped her with her eternal baking. Liam is at work again, diluting the beer. And then something happened to me. I don't even know how to describe it. I was walking home from work, and I felt like I was driving on a flat spot. I was leaning on a tree, and I could barely stand, I felt it. No, it's hard to stand. My head was spinning. The whole world was spinning in my eyes. I couldn't resist. I felt hot, even though the weather was cool that day, and I felt like I was standing under a hot shower. Then I sat right on the curb and tried to breathe deeply. Sitting was also difficult. I wanted to lie down, but I knew that if I lay down, I would pass out, but I was lucky. I saw a neighbor walking by, and he came running up to me, so scared. "Helen, are you ill? You look pale. Maybe an ambulance?" And I just shook my hand and pointed at my house. "Help me to get home." He took me all the way to the door. I kind of sat up. I got away. I went to the bathroom. At least I thought I'd rinse my face with cold water. It would be fresher somehow. And while I was walking, I remembered that I always had pregnancy tests, just in case. I thought I'd check it out, but it wouldn't hurt. I did everything that is required, put this stuff away so as not to be nervous, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bathtub, nervous. In front of myself, pretending I don't care. I pretend to wash my face, brush my teeth, comb my hair, and then it's time to look at the test. And of course, and there it is, 2 stripes, fat, clear rose. Rejoice, like Helen, you're a mom now, but I still can't understand. Not even to rejoice, but just to realize. Mom, I am now. What is it? What do I do now? Life will change, it's clear, but how it will change, and I need to tell my husband, after all, in general, I come out of the bathroom, the test in my hands, I hear Liam is already at home, on the phone with someone. Well and good, I think I'll make my husband happy. I sneak up on tiptoe in the room, so as not to make noise, and I can't think whether to tell him at once or just to show him the test. And suddenly I hear him, my husband, the same one who swore his fidelity to me, saying to someone, "Why are you crying, kitten?" I had to go back, but you know I have a wife. The local climate suits her well, the doctors say so. But who am I to argue with doctors? They're not stupid, they know what they recommend. So we moved back, and then she wanted to come back here herself. She wanted to be buried in her homeland. It won't be long now. They've already found a place in the cemetery. And as soon as we bury her, we'll get married. And the main thing is that I'll get her house, and the summer house too. If you want to move here, you'll have everything ready. No, we'll sell everything here. Go to your place, buy an apartment and live. That's how it is. They're dividing my inheritance, and I was just about to congratulate my husband on becoming a father soon. I approached him from behind, and quietly said, "You can't wait, you bastard. And your woman won't wait for you, so pack your things and don't let me see you again." Liam jumped at my words. He's standing there with eyes like round, evil eyes. "You've got it all wrong. I'll explain everything." "It's not true at all. You've heard it all." I didn't say that, and my eyes are running around, looking for something to grab onto. Ah, so he's standing there, shaking, afraid, and I'm laughing. Funny and light and easy, as if a huge stone had been lifted from my soul. I was even grateful to him for the setup. He finally took a breath, looked me in the eye, and smiled ingratiatingly, like a cat, which caresses, and he was thinking how to steal meat from the table. "Well, Helen, why did you forget all the good things at once? Have you fallen out of love with me?" That's when I realized I don't love him anymore. I don't love him anymore, and I felt so good. I'm standing there laughing, and I'm thinking, how happy I really am. I have a good job. I've got a place to live. I've got a child on the way. I've got rid of a scoundrel of a man. How bad is that? Anyway, I look at him silently, but inside I'm happy. And he suddenly says to me, "You've drunk my blood enough, and now you want to leave me without it? No way. If you want to go, go, but I'll stay here." I laughed again, and he ran out into the yard. I thought he was gone, but no, I was wrong. I hear footsteps. He goes into the house again, comes back with an axe in his hands and says to me, "Go away, or I'll kill you right here." And he looks so determined, but he's not giving or taking. And I was scared. I told him quietly, Liam, quietly, "I understand you." And I tiptoed past him, on my toes along the wall, and then I ran out of the house. Right across the street, I ran to Aunt Clara. She was about to go to sleep, but when she saw me, she fell asleep. She didn't make any noise, though. She's not that kind of person. She wrapped her shawl around me and said, "My pie is still hot." She brought me to the kitchen, gave me tea, and I told her everything, and about the pregnancy, and how I overheard the conversation, and about Lion with an axe. I've never been so scared in my life as I was then, and it seems to realize that he has no rights to this house, that it is necessary to go to the police. But I'm afraid, I think, well, they will kick him out of my house, and what then? Stay locked up and keep my nose to the street. Maybe he'll find me somewhere with an axe, and then you won't be able to find the end of it. You'd have to prove it was him." Aunt Clara listened to me, and then she said, "All right, you'll stay with me for a while. Now go to bed, and then we'll see what to do." So I did. In the morning I woke up, and it was so strange. My whole life had turned upside down, and the morning came as if nothing had happened. The sun is shining in the sky, the birds are chirping. I got up and my head was empty. I can't live at Aunt Clara's forever, so should I go to my parents? But then I realized that I can't go to them, I can't scare them with my problems, and I can't stay here forever either. I decided to live like this for a couple of days, and then I'll figure out what to do and how to do it. And so the day passes, and in the evening I was surprised directly. Well, not a day without surprises. I didn't have time to recover from one shock, new miracles. I'm in the kitchen, Aunt Clara roll out the dough, and suddenly I see through the window, as a car to my house, and a girl comes out of it. She has her back to me. I cannot see her face, but the fact that I can see it is enough for a conclusion. She was a tall girl, red-haired, the same girl Liam was dating at the time, and Liam came out of the house all dressed up to meet the lady. Aunt Clara just looked out of the window, sneered, and said nothing. Then the cream knocked down, and I did not know whether to cry or laugh because of Liam's impudence. And so a day passes, too, and the beautiful girl does not leave. Yes, moreover, she comes out of the house in my road to meet Liam from work. They go for a walk, and I see she's wearing a familiar dress, mine. I don't know why she needed it. She didn't look like a beggar. Aunt Clara looked at this red-haired wonder of nature once, twice, and then she winked at me and said, "What a fool your Liam is. You found yourself an old woman with bling." I was stunned, I said. "What are you doing, Aunt Clara? She's young." And Aunt Clara said to me, "You understand that my senior doctor does plastic surgery on all kinds of women who want to look young. So this young woman of yours is a regular client of my surgeon. My daughter came to visit, complained about this woman, showed her pictures. She said, 'Mom, guess how old she is?' I then also decided that maybe 20 years old, and my daughter enlightened me and said, 45, Mom, she already has grandchildren growing up, and she's still 20 years old wants to seem. Her son looks older than her." I couldn't believe my ears. So this fairy has a grown-up son and grandchildren too. Aunt Clara is trying to kill me, she continues, and her ex-husband is also familiar to me, not distant. He is the owner of the local equestrian club. Here I was almost ready to faint. Miracles indeed. It was necessary for my Liam to choose such an interesting specimen as his mistress. And he says to me, "You do this. Go to your parents, and I'll talk to the owner of the club. Let him influence the former and your Romeo." I was hesitant, but then I decided to go, decided that I would not say anything to my parents, just pretend that I came to visit, and that's it. I thought I would live in nature, breathe fresh air. I didn't expect more. But I didn't know my parents well. They bought a dacha so ruined, you can't look at it without tears. I thought I'd come and see my dad fixing something there, and my mom growing cucumbers and tomatoes. Aha, so I come, and they have a paradise there, and the seashore from the window you can see, and their garden all blooming and fragrant. There are armchairs in the garden, a hammock for Grandma, a swing for Mom. Father even arranged a fountain himself and launched fish there, gold ones. Grandma, then in the hammock swinging, reading books, then stands up and goes to feed the fish. But that's not all. My grandmother's neighbor, a cottage dweller, decided to marry her. A noble man, a scientist, studying butterflies. Grandmother, of course, as a decent girl, immediately does not agree, but the eyes that builds and look into the visit invites. I laughed and laughed at them, and I was amused. They are so nice, touching, cute. After all, grown-up people and even not young already, but so much trepidation, as if, well, here is the first love they have. A gentleman used to come to my grandmother's house in the evenings, and he took care of her like that. That today's men would learn from him. Then a basket of apples to bring her, then peaches, then bring honey tasty something, and a bouquet, of course. And not store flowers, half dead ones, but real field flowers. If you take them in your hands, you'll be dizzy. They're so fragrant. Every day he collected flowers for his beloved, and his grandmother set a table in the garden, a teapot, beautiful cups from the service, jam, dried goods, buns, beauty. They sit in the garden late at night, talking about art, about painting. Our elderly young man reads poems to his grandmother, then they walk along the alleys or go to the sea. He holds her hand gently, and the grandmother in a wide-brimmed hat, barefoot along the shore. I looked at their romance like, I don't know, like an interesting movie. You can't tear yourself away. You're wondering what's going to happen next. Well, 3 days passed and I had to go back, and I had the most interesting reasons for it. One morning, a dark gray SUV stopped right outside our fence. The owner of it turned out to be the owner of the equestrian club that the late Uncle James hated so much, but he turned out to be a decent man. So he came up to me, even bowed, introduced himself a little. My name's Brian. He's all dressed in a suit and tie, and I'm just like people at the dacha, dressed in what I can't afford, with no makeup on. Even my hands are smeared with berry juice. I was picking for jam, but it was as if he didn't notice anything, and I was treated as if we had met him at some reception. He says to me, "You, Helen, can go back to your home and live there in peace without fear. Neither your ex-husband nor Betty will ever bother you again. If you'd like, I'm ready to take you back right now." I didn't believe him, so I told him to take me back. So he drove me back to the house, and there's Mommy. Not just no ex, there is also all the minor repairs made, platbins on the windows painted, in the kitchen a new stove stands, and a small room under the nursery is remade, a crib, toys. So I thought, Aunt Clara, what kind of connections do you have? And Brian takes my hand and says quietly, "I want to apologize for my ex-wife Betty. We separated a long time ago, and she probably got tired of being alone, so she started looking for a life partner. Don't be angry with her if it's in your power to do so, especially since, as I understand it, you and Liam have already broken up." I nodded, and I waited to see what would happen next. I sensed that he hadn't said everything yet, and I guessed. He thought for a while, and then he said, "Can I invite you to dinner tonight? I think we might have some common topics of conversation. I heard that my father is taking care of your grandmother." Helen shook her head and pulled herself up. "Have I bored you, Thomas?" she asked. "I've had you talking. What happened next?" Thomas asked impatiently. The story had drawn him in, and he was eager to know how it ended. And then it was very simple. The woman smiled. Brian and I were soon married, and I gave birth to 2 first-class boys at the proper time. My grandmother agreed to marry my beau after much beating from her beau, and Aunt Clara became a successful businesswoman. She opened her own pastry shop, and now she has 2 of her daughters working for her. But soon she will have to hire someone else because there are a lot of orders and not enough hands. Aunt Clara is also going to publish a book of her own recipes. How exciting! Sincerely admired the young man. To be honest, while you were telling me everything, I was more worried about Aunt Clara. How long the woman has worked, still pulling the family. Yes, she's a great woman. Fondly, Helen said. It's people like her that keep everything going. And your ex-husband, Liam, do you know what happened to him? Well, Liam's a bit more fun. He married this Betty of his, and it was only after the wedding that he found out about his wife's true age and that she had a grown-up son and even a couple of grandchildren. This, of course, offended him terribly, and there were even rumors that he wanted to divorce her, but Betty turned out to be a cunning lady. She gave Liam a small business, a few flower pavilions, but the gift was very conditional. In other words, she made him the manager, but after the divorce, he could lose that position, and with it a lot of money. Who would like that? Especially if he's used to living large. So Liam lives with his Betty, runs a flower store, and keeps a very careful eye on his appearance so that his wife does not lose interest in him. And of course he succeeds. Wait a minute. Thomas interrupted her. If you are married and have children, why do you live here alone? I'm not here for long. Helen said softly. I'm just planning to open my own atelier here, so I thought I'd live in the city for a while, explore the market, so to speak. I'll be back home soon, and I'll be with my husband and sons again. You know what? Unexpectedly, Thomas suggested. Why don't you not sit alone tonight, but come and visit us tonight? I'll buy a cake. We'll drink tea and talk. Come on. Helen even choked a little from surprise. Thomas, do you really think your mother or anyone else in this house will be happy to see me? They don't know you at all. He said judiciously. That's why they're not happy. But if they knew how kind and simple you are, they'd love you and you'd make a lot of friends. The woman shrugged. It won't work, Thomas. I'm going home tonight. Thomas nodded silently and regretfully. He tried to imagine the town Helen would return to, and the picture was dreamy. He saw apricot trees and the seashore. He smelled the smells of wormwood and pastries from Aunt Clara's pastry shop. I'd like to come and visit you someday, he said. May I? Sure. She was delighted. You'd be very welcome. On the way home, Thomas stopped by the beauty parlor. Now he knew exactly where to spend his summer money. Did you want a haircut, young man? The pretty blonde at the information desk asked. No, he shook his head. Tell me, can I buy a certificate from you? When he got home, he made his mother pull away from cleaning and took her into the kitchen. This is for you, Mom. He smiled and handed his mother a dainty brown and silver envelope. It's a certificate to a beauty parlor. You can get your nails done, your hair colored, and these other things. What are they? Spa treatments. Mother looked at the envelope. How much money did you spend on such nonsense? She muttered. But Thomas could see from the smile that flashed across her lips that her mother was pleased with the gift, but she didn't know how to show it. Even this fleeting smile she hastened to hide behind her usual grumbling, as if she were embarrassed by this unintentional outburst of joy. It's not nothing, Mom, he said affectionately. You are beautiful at me, and all beautiful women must be pampered. Well, so that they do not turn into grandmothers. And only then he noticed that there were tears in his mother's eyes. Thank you, my son. She whispered and hugged Thomas, ruffling the hair at the back of his neck. He thought that perhaps the last time she had hugged him like that was when he was a child. You've grown so big. That's good, isn't it, Mammy? He stroked her shoulder. Now go get some rest. You want to lie in the bath? You want to read a book? I'll take care of the cleaning myself. In the evening, he went out on the balcony just in time to see Helen coming out of the driveway, holding a carabier in her arms. There was not a soul in the courtyard, oddly enough for the warm summer time. The neighbor walked leisurely to her turquoise car and put her dog in the cabin. Before she got behind the wheel, she felt eyes on her, looked up and immediately saw Thomas. She waved at him, and Thomas read the movement of her lips. "Have a nice day. Bye." He raised his hand in farewell. His dad hadn't returned from the garage yet. Thomas peeked into his parents' bedroom and froze on the threshold. His mother was sitting on the bed with a jewelry box in her lap, going through her rings, trying on one or the other and humming softly. As Liam exited another of his controlled pavilions, he noted with amazement that it was beginning to get dark outside. Strange how. You don't get used to the fact that it gets dark late in the summer, and it's already autumn. You could go crazy. Liam looked tiredly at his watch. 9 p.m., so we'd have to stop at another pavilion and then go to the supplier base. Roses should be delivered today, and of course chrysanthemums. They're the most popular item, they're the first to be grabbed, and it's a hell of a delivery. It turns out, then deliver the goods to the points and before midnight, he will not get today. While he's delivering, while the girls take the goods and report back to him. Roses trim and put to drink, with chrysanthemums more fiddling, cut, remove excess leaves, and then please paint them in all the colors of the rainbow. Customers like multicolored. Florists really already from the monotony of wool towel, and they can be understood. Girls are creative, they free self-expression, they want to create unusual floral compositions, and most often they are asked, "Over there those red roses, girl, pieces of 7 and wrap in cellophane." "Don't cry, my good ones." He comforted the florists. "I understand, you understand beauty, you want to create it, but always ask yourself, and who will buy such beauty?" People are conservative creatures. They like the classics, proven virgins. It can't be helped. Creativity is either free or commercial. It's boring to play the same thing day after day. The girls sighed, but deep down they couldn't help but agree with the manager. Yes, boring of course, but what can you do? That's life. In any job, there's a place for routine, and you can't get away from it. However, Liam sometimes managed to amuse the girls. However, he did it in his own way, most often inviting them to cafes and entertaining them with jokes. For this his subordinates loved him and did not refuse to work overtime if he asked them to do so. Moreover, he himself worked late, which was mistaken for diligence. In fact, he just wasn't drawn to go home. Betty was already 50, and although she still managed to hide her age with the efforts of surgeons and cosmetologists, but her mood was the most gloomy, she more and more often held on the mirror reflection, gloomy look. Perhaps if there were a single person who cared about her, he would explain to Betty that it was this sullenness in her once childishly open gaze, those mournfully compressed lips that made her look older. If only she could remember again what it was like to smile with good cheer, she would instantly shed a dozen years. However, the beautician, a kind soul, decided to help her upset client in her own way. "Betty, don't worry, you look great." "Yeah," Betty said. "Great for an old lady." "You're wrong," the girl replied calmly. "Nowadays, 50 isn't old, but if you're so worried, I am." With a sigh, Betty admitted, "It's a shame that no elixir of eternal youth has ever been invented." Well, eternal or not eternal, there is a secret. True, it's not a secret at all, but not everyone uses it. You'll fall in love. You know, with doubt in her voice, Betty stretched out. It didn't seem like a good idea to get a young husband now. 5 years ago, she'd been foolish enough to get involved with one, and what had happened? Annoyance and fatigue, let alone a young lover. That beautician's a fool, after all. No, listen to me. slyly smiled at the girl. First, a man in love himself becomes more beautiful. This is how our hormone works. All that blush on the cheeks, shiny eyes, worth a lot. And then, have you ever wondered why older men love younger ones? Because old goats want young, fresh cabbages, answered Betty gloomily. Right. Why? Simple. The painted finger flew up. That's a kind of energizing, youthful energy, you know. And dying of a massive heart attack during a lovemaking session is also a kind of youthful energy boost. And you don't bring it to such fanaticism. The girl was not confused. Why get so much carried away? Keep within the limits of moderation, and then everything will be all right. Betty sat sullenly in the car for a long time, staring at herself. So I should fall in love? Well, one of her friends, a big fan of young bodies, had said something about a new nightclub opening in town the other day, and she thought it might be a good idea to go there. After all, no one's forcing her to have an affair. You'll see, Betty, you'll like it. Kathy said excitedly, dragging her friend by the hand through the narrow, winding corridors of the nightclub. Why are the aisles so narrow? Betty wrinkled her nose. Was it on purpose so that only skinny people could fit in here? It's called the labyrinth. It's a concept. The concept. Betty grumbled. It's not a concept. It's all contraception. If a couple wants to cuddle, where can they go? You can't fit two people in here. Come on, Betty. My friend laughed. What are we, teenagers or what, to huddle in the corridors? There are other places for that. All right, don't grumble, look. At last the entrance to the common room loomed before them. The light at the end of the tunnel. Betty sighed with relief. The hall was made in the style of a shipwreck. Coral and countless shells dotted the walls, sea waves splashed on the screens disguised as portholes, and colored schools of fish swam by from time to time. Instead of tables, dark, artificially aged barrels were set up. What are we supposed to do here? Betty asked. Carefully, she lowered herself onto a rickety stool. Rest. Kathy smiled and tapped the barrel. A waiter in a Jack Sparrow costume appeared nearby. What do you want? Beautiful naiads? He smirked. 2 dark rums. Kathy commanded. Double. I don't like rum. Betty hissed, but then a silhouette stepped out of the club's semi-darkness. Dancing? He said, leaning toward the woman. Betty looked into the stranger's face and was instantly drowned in his gaze, deep as the ocean and intoxicating as dark rum. She returned home that evening, cheerful, a little tipsy, and absolutely certain that she was beautiful. Before going to bed, Betty gingerly glanced in the mirror and suddenly saw a delicate pink blush on her cheeks and sparkling eyes. That beautician hadn't been a fool after all. The change in her mood did not escape her husband's notice. Betty was suddenly humming, smiling, even joking. And in general, she was clearly showing signs of a good mood, and she also stopped letting go of her cell phone. And she blushed femininely whenever she got a new message. I don't think they were from Banks. She had a lover. Liam thought and noted that, in fact, he almost didn't care. It was bound to happen sooner or later, and in general, it was not a disaster. Moreover, Liam was clearly holding on to this marriage, not out of tender feelings. His motives were of a different, purely practical nature. He had recently visited his hometown, and he had heard rumors that Helen was happily married to the owner of a horse club and had given birth to twin boys. That's why it was offensive. Lion was not so stupid to resent his ex-wife. His wife was certainly not guilty of anything. Rather, he was angry at the fate, which, as he thought, deceived him. He tried tried to organize his life so that everything was calm, stable, and in the end, neither of these things. Maybe the point is that you cannot allow your stability and peace of mind depend on the whims of others? Who knows? But that seems to be the point. As soon as I get home, he promised himself, I'll go straight online. It's time to look for a new job. In Aunt Clara's pastry shop, there was a joyous buzz today. The birthday of the hostess was always celebrated in a big way and even a kind of glamour. For example, today all the pastries were exclusively French and made according to some ancient recipes. And in the evening there was going to be fireworks in honor of the birthday girl. Helen was pleased to note how much Aunt Clara had grown since she stopped standing at the oven around the clock. Where had that formidable red-faced woman with the wart gone? Aunt Clara was now a pleasantly rounded woman, but no one would call her fat. Not even a memory of the wart remained, and her complexion was fresh, with a slight pinkish blush. Helen quickly found her grandmother and winked conspiratorially at her. The most important event of the holiday was still to come. Today, Aunt Clara was going to announce that after 5 years of widowhood, she was going to remarry. The man she had chosen was a respectable man by the standards of the town. He was the owner of the very cafe where Aunt Clara had worked for many, many years before her first husband lost his job. As it turned out, the owner of this worthy establishment had long ago been in love with the talented cook, but the fact that he was married kept him from openly expressing his feelings. However, a few years ago, his wife left him, and after the divorce was finalized, the owner of the cafe could no longer lurking to begin courting his beloved. And although at first they hid their relationship from everyone, but now they still decided to get married. On this occasion, the lovers planned a wedding trip, which they were going to go to right after today's fireworks. Helen's grandmother, who with her new husband liked to travel, personally made an itinerary of the wedding trip for Aunt Clara. Clara, dear, don't be stubborn. I've found the most romantic cities for you. Look, let's start with Prague. There you'll walk through pastry shops, taste all the impossible deliciousness, and you'll get recipes for your business. Then move to Vienna. Think music, waltzes, fairy tales. You can't find a better place if you want to immerse yourself in an atmosphere of wonder. And then, of course, to Paris, the city of love and debauchery. Don't laugh, darling. You'll need both in marriage. That's enough, Lisa. Aunt Clara Pluggett fears not to hear this outrageous chatter. But Helen knew her grandmother. If she wants to say something, it will be impossible to stop her. Clara, do not show off. I know what I'm saying. And after Paris, Venice. Here you'll find all the romance you want. Canals at night, gondolas, pigeons, and all sorts of stories about Casanova, who, thank God, lived in a different time. After that, you can go home and get to work. Helen looked at the night sky. Very soon fireworks sparks like magic flowers would blossom in it. And most importantly, another happy fate would be formed today. Why just one? 2. Aunt Clara and her lucky fiancé and her children and grandchildren would surely be happy too. They all loved Aunt Clara, their precious, wise mother and grandmother, and of course wished her happiness. Happiness is every man's dream, something for which he overcomes difficulties day after day, for which he works and finds the strength to move on, even when it seems that there is no strength even for one step, and it comes to us in different ways. Aunt Clara deserved her happiness, and it came to her grandmother by itself, and to her, Helen. She thought about it and realized that she didn't know the answer to that question. Is it necessary to know it? The main thing is that all is well with her.
subscribe, and click the bell.
So, Jacob, can I congratulate you? The surgeon was being mocked by Nurse Maria. Your long-awaited vacation has finally arrived. At least I'll get a break from you. But don't make a despot out of me, the doctor said angrily. As if you do not work well with me, I can even say you want you and cherished. And you waved, Jacob. That's for prevention. The surgical nurse laughed. Or you'll like it so much on vacation that you won't want to go back to work. And then what are you gonna do? You're gonna start hounding me. Yeah, you'll be chased. You won't go for a word in your pocket. Jacob said with annoyance in his voice. You only have to say one word, and you say 10 in return. That's why you're lucky to have me. Maria did not stop. I'm the one who yells at others. But for you, I'll tear anyone apart like an asshole. That's how the surgeon got up from the table. We will celebrate my vacation today. He looked questioningly at the nurse. Or like last time, we're going to clink tea. Or I don't want anything strong. The woman grimaced. I have to work tomorrow. You're the one who'll be sunbathing on the beach, Maria. Frankly speaking, I don't want to go anywhere. Sadly, replied the surgeon. I would be at home in bed for these 5 days. If I don't have to, I wouldn't go anywhere. And as for drinking, let's just have a beer. I don't want wine either. I don't want to be on an airplane with a sore head. Let's do it, nurse. I'll just run to the store and get some Baltica. And after the surgery, you and I will have about an hour off before the end of the shift. We'll celebrate your vacation with you. Maria quickly packed up and went out to the store. Jacob took care of his paperwork and completely immersed in routine work. What's your vacation? Did he raise his bottle of beer? 4. Nurse at the end of the shift. May your vacation be amazing. I wish you take your mind off everything and enjoy life a little. Anyway, Jacob, here's to you. And here's wishing you don't miss me. He raised his bottle. 2 dark glasses clinked against each other, and the man and the woman closed their eyes, either from pleasure or from fatigue. Jacob was a hereditary doctor. His parents and their ancestors had been very careful to protect the legacy of their lineage, which originated from a single surgeon who had come to work. Jacob's great-great-grandfather was one of the best surgeons of the time. But the difficult political environment led to the fact that even the doctor's grandfather traveled frequently. But despite the difficult times, the family managed to maintain its continuity, which made it possible to continue not only family traditions, but also to educate professional doctors. From the very childhood, Jacob knew that he would be a surgeon. And it was not because his father, Ethan, who was a surgeon himself, insisted on it. It was as if the boy was born for this very purpose. He had never had a fear of blood, which is usually seen in children dogs with their paws tied up, cats with poisoning, and many other critters. This was for little Ethan, his real world, and he simply adored it. At school, the teenager now and then stopped the blood of his favorite classmates, or in the manifestation of sprains, when someone unluckily fell from a tree. Despite such a strange hobby, Ethan had many friends, and it sometimes embarrassed his parents. The latter always considered themselves true intellectuals, but their son was always socializing with the simplest people. Very often they had lunch and dinner with children from disadvantaged families. But when the guy entered medical school, everything in his life immediately changed. Time was barely enough for a little snack and sleep. So a lot of friends just drifted away. The only friend who still socialized with Ethan to this day was Max. He sat at the same desk with him for years in high school. Max went to Boston. Yes, he stayed there to work after graduation. He was an electronics engineer. Max would visit his parents in Chicago from time to time, and they would meet Ethan. The boy's parents thought that eventually their friendship would end. But to everyone's surprise, over the years it only became stronger. Therefore, each of them was aware of all the things that happened to each other. Jacob, despite his profession, was a sentimental and gentle person. He was very fond of poetry. He and his nurse Maria even had one interesting tradition. Before every operation, Jacob would recite a poem. Jacob was 32, and he was married to the beautiful Adriana. He had to spend a lot of effort to win her. The girl was completely unapproachable for the first few years. James was a longtime family friend and had 2 daughters. The first girl was from the first marriage, and in her there was nothing remarkable. But Adriana grew up to be more than just a beauty. She looked like a real model. Jacob was 4 years older than her. They hadn't seen much of Adriana growing up. Her father was a very rich man, so his daughters were rarely at home. But when Jacob met the girl on her birthday, he could not take his eyes off her. James decided to celebrate such an event at home. A lot of guests were invited. Among them was Ethan's family. Jacob was almost 24 at the time. He had 1 year of college and 2 years of graduate school left. Adriana had just returned from Europe, and the girl didn't want to stay at home. There were rumors that she had a boyfriend, but no one really knew about it. So Jacob wrote it off as gossip. The boy hadn't seen Adriana for a long time. Sometimes her older sister came to visit, but the girl herself had last seen Ethan about 5 years ago. "Oh my God," he exclaimed. "How beautiful is she?" Adriana is a goddess. Jacob kept his eyes on her the whole birthday. It was obvious that she didn't care about him at all. She was always talking to someone and laughing loudly. "Hello, Adriana." He came up to her. "Jacob, happy birthday. I wish you always remain as beautiful as a goddess." The girl looked at him with interest. She could not realize at first who it was. "Jacob, is it you?" She finally recognized the guy. "I'm sorry, I couldn't recognize you at first. You've changed a lot." You laughed too, Jacob. "How are you doing?" "What are you doing?" Thanks. I'm doing fine," the girl replied calmly. "My dad dragged me back, and I'm so used to USA. Did we have such a bad joke of a guy? What's there that isn't here?" "Everything," Adriana laughed. "After talking to Adriana, I began to think about her all the time. She stayed in the USA until the end of the summer, so we often visited them, went for walks with the girl." "What if you fell in love with a Russian guy?" he asked her once. "So what? What would I do with him?" She replied unhappily. "I would die of boredom with him. I need a real man, brave, courageous. I need him to be macho. You know what I mean? Not really." Jacob scratched his head. "How do you explain it?" "I like temperamental guys to get me," answered the girl. "I don't like it when guys get emotional. I like it when they risk something for me. Then I see my value. And the more risk I take, the more likely I am to fall in love with a guy like that. Isn't just saying I love you enough?" "I didn't understand, Jacob. You could write poems for the one you love. What's the point?" Adriana laughed. "Need action drive." That time Jacob did not understand what Adriana wanted from life, but that didn't make her any less attractive to him. He fell more and more in love with her. They spent a lot of time together. But the girl didn't seem to notice him. She kept talking about what kind of guy she would like. Maybe in this way Adriana was teasing Jacob, but the fact that she didn't like him and wasn't interested in him was obvious. The time was nearing the end of August. Jacob couldn't stand it and invited Adriana to take a walk around Chicago. They were walking, talking about nothing. The guy suddenly stopped Adriana. "I love you." Lowering his head, Jacob said, "Marry me." "Jacob, you what?" The girl laughed. "I don't want to offend you, but you're not my type at all." "What tastes can be when it comes to love," he said in amazement. "Sorry, but I can never love you." Adriana replied with a smile. "Try to understand me." But Jacob, no matter how hard he tried, did not understand her. The girl flew to Europe again, leaving him with a broken heart. The guy hoped that in time he would forget her, but the passion for her only flared up. The next summer she flew back to her parents again. Jacob followed her around. "Jacob, what are you like a little child?" laughed at him girl. "I love you so much that I don't want to live. I told you many times you are not my type." That night, Jacob got drunk for the first time in his life. He was so hurt and unbearable that he drank too much. He remembered that he had gone, so to speak, to a showdown. But beyond that, his memory was a complete blank. The next day, he woke up in his house and remembered nothing. As Adriana told him afterwards, he didn't get to see her that day, but it was a good lesson for Ethan. The guy hadn't been drinking before. But after this incident, he didn't drink anything else except champagne and beer. And so ended the summer, and another year passed. Jacob had already told his parents that he was passionately in love with Adriana, and that he could not imagine his life without her. Jacob, I will talk to Sergei Nikolaevich, said Ethan. Maybe he can influence his daughter. Because after the incident with Mom, he's going crazy. What happened at Emily's? The son asked in surprise. She was seeing some guy secretly from her parents, sighed the father. Her parents wouldn't let her marry him. So she got pregnant by him and had a baby. Now they've sent Emily to Europe. She's in Italy with the baby in their villa. Her parents are trying to marry her off to anyone to wash away the shame. So now the court may not even look at Adriana's wishes. They won't survive a second disgrace. Wow, Jacob said in shock. So Emily went against her parents. That's not like her at all. Adriana is. Yeah, that's right. Maybe that hurts James more, Ethan said with annoyance. She's always been a girl, calm and easygoing. But once she fell in love, she went against her father. And who's the boy? Curious? Jacob asked. Did she introduce him to her parents? No, replied the father. She only told her father that she had found her man, that he was a regular guy. Naturally, James didn't agree to that. I understand him in some ways, though, the boy sighed. I'm so in love with Adriana that I can't live without her. Maybe the same thing happened to her. Anyway, I'll talk to him, the man said calmly. You see, Jacob, I think he would have agreed right away if it weren't for one thing. You mean the money? The son sighed. They're very rich people. Being friends is one thing, but marrying your daughter to me is another. Yes, Ethan said sadly. His status might not allow it. And so it was. James had turned him down. He knew Jacob was a good guy, but he wanted a more promising husband for his daughter. So another year passed, and Jacob gave up altogether. The guy was finishing his residency and decided that he would never get married in his life. But suddenly circumstances changed dramatically. It was the end of May when James called his father and arranged to meet in person. Ethan, I know you may not have understood me last time, he began. I in no way meant to offend you or your son. But my status in society requires strict adherence to certain rules that I cannot break. In Europe, Adriana dated a guy for several years. He is the son of an immigrant from the USA who managed to get rich there. People there are not just rich, but in their circles famous, sorry. I didn't tell you anything about that. Anyway, Adriana and this guy had a wedding scheduled for early May. Turns out he had another girlfriend. The guy's parents had cleared it with us. They really wanted Adriana to be their daughter-in-law. We even planned to pool our capital, but a week before the wedding Adriana, or even the girl, found out and gave Mike a scandal. She also told his parents everything. Anyway, it all ended with him editing some obscure video and audio recordings. He slandered Adriana in front of everyone at the wedding and accused her of cheating. We left Europe in such disgrace that we still don't know what to do. If Jacob still loves Adriana, then we are ready to perform your wedding. Ethan looked at his friend in utter bewilderment. On the one hand, the man realized that this was not about friendship or love, but about profit for James. There was already whispering about him and his daughter in the USA, and it was hurting his reputation. On the other hand, Jacob still loved Adriana. The man was in a very difficult position. James, I'm sorry, but I can't decide for myself. Finally, he said. I need to consult with my son. Yes, I understand. I'll wait, James replied. I'm just asking you to think it over. Adriana agreed to marry James, and just like that, fate took an unexpected turn. And Adriana married a surgeon from a poor but intelligent family. I'll try to love you, Adriana said after the wedding. Then Jacob was ready to wait for her all his life, but time passed, and their relationship remained half friendly, half official. But Jacob still continued to believe that one day Adriana would be his not only body, but would love him with all her soul. The man hoped that things would change after the baby was born. He and his wife had been actively planning for a child for several years now, but so far everything had been unsuccessful. That's why Adriana suggested that during his vacation to change the environment and go to the sea to rest. Jacob was so tired at work. He would not have had the strength to fly further than Turkey. Adriana, of course, wanted to vacation on more prestigious beaches. But in the end, she and her husband agreed. Jacob, with your job, we cannot go anywhere at all, complained in the evening wife. Well, maybe that's enough. Why do you need this city hospital? Dad promised us a long time ago that if you open your own clinic, he'll help us. Adriana. Well, what am I going to do in this private clinic? Jacob was angry. I can't just sit around signing papers without surgery. No matter how hard it is, I love my job. I save people. I don't want to. There's no point in cutting off someone's cellulite or plumping up their lips with your experience and expertise. Would you be able to get rich like that already? Adriana was indignant. Good plastic surgeons make a lot of money. Adriana, is there something you're missing? Her husband looked at her sternly. Do you need anything? It's not that. She answered quickly. There's a difference between a doctor from a city hospital and a famous plastic surgeon. And my goal is to save people, not to disfigure them under obscure standards of beauty. Jacob said coldly, when will all this be banned? How much do these plastic doctors produce ugliness? Is what they do beautiful? It's just a tribute to fashion. It's like when they used to spoil teeth to make them ink, as on losing cheeks, hit with forces containing mercury. The point remains the same. People have to learn how to age naturally. Jesus, how old-fashioned are you? Adriana whispers, you don't know anything about fashion or beauty. Imagine, I had a baby and gained weight. And where do you think I should put all this fat? How many women suffer from such problems? You're the man who set these beauty standards. You wouldn't even look at me fat. You're right, but only partially sighed the man. Up to 30 years really looking for some ideal perfect form. But now I do not care what size clothes you wear. And imagine if I got really fat, what then? But I'd hate it if you were fat, she answered honestly. You see, you are not at all interested in my content. With annoyance in his voice, said Jacob. So it turns out that your attitude to me determines only the form. And what kind of person am I? This is for you a complete nonsense. Unfortunately, this topic was not finished that day, and I watched a lot of people on the beach. I mean, why did this woman come here to show off her body? Isn't it humiliating for her husband? The man watched carefully as one woman about 35 years old walked her body out. She was wearing an attractive swimsuit and was trying her best to prove to other people that she had a special figure. The stranger furtively caught the gazes of other men and enjoyed it. But here her husband was also standing nearby, preying on the younger ones with his eyes and breaking them with his gaze. What is this? Jacob was indignant to himself. Is that a family? Is there any love there? Each of them would cheat on the other if they could. He looked unhappily at Ada, who was posing in all her glory near the water. She was going in and out of the sea. Of course, Jacob knew somewhere inside that Adriana didn't love him, but he still hoped that one day she would want to look inside him and see what he was really like. The man shifted his gaze and an elderly couple came into his field of vision. The man and woman were in their early 70s, but they were holding hands like teenagers. The stranger had a rounder belly, but it was obvious that his companion was skinny, and the old woman was not embarrassed in the slightest. They kept looking into each other's eyes and smiled merrily. How pleasant to look at them, Jacob rejoiced. Nothing changed their love. No age, no decrepit bodies, no passionate glances around. How I wish Adriana could love me the same way. After a few days, Jacob finally calmed down and was able to enjoy life. The last 2 days had gone so well that the man even regretted the fact that they had to leave tomorrow. Hello, Max, dialed Jacob. Friend's number when they got home. I'm on vacation, so I can at least talk to you normally. I'm so glad to hear from you. I heard a happy voice. Listen, I'm gonna be at my parents' house in 2 days. Why don't we get together? I'm only going to be here for a couple of days, but I can't not meet you because I miss you so much. Jacob was looking forward to meeting his old friend. Finally, it was Thursday. Max, hey buddy. He hugged the man. How many years? How many winters? Hey buddy. Max hugged him. We haven't seen each other for almost a year, so tell me how you're doing. They liked to meet at their old cafe. This time they still had the same tradition. What business could there be? Jacob answered calmly. I have all the same things going on. It's the same scene, only sometimes the scenery changes. Do you have at least some variety? You have different operations, a friend said. And we have been sitting on our project for 3 years. We still cannot move. I am already sick of it, and I understand you, answered Jacob. It reminds me of the last years of studying at the Institute, knowing for sure that it will all end soon, but it all drags on and on without end. Sighed Max. I regret so much that I turned down an internship abroad then. You know Peter, who went to France instead of me and stayed. Sometimes he calls me and tells me they have such interesting things going on over there. There's a project in Africa or in Israel. He's almost seen the whole world, and I was afraid. How could I abandon my project in New York? So I was left with nothing. Max, no one knows what's best for you. His friend looked at him seriously. Maybe you wouldn't have succeeded in France, or maybe it just wasn't your time to finish your project. Maybe something better will come up for you. Well, you're right about that, my friend smiled. If I'd gone to France, then this miracle wouldn't have happened. Betty is expecting a baby. Wow, the friend rejoiced. My God, how many years have you tried? How many protocols have you gone through? It's a miracle. I'm sorry, but I never said Max's head down before. We're 8 months pregnant with twins, boys. Tenta, let's grab a beer and toast to that, Jacob suggested. I'm so happy for you. What about you and Adriana? Max asked. You've already started planning. You know, we don't have any problems, neither she nor I, the man replied. She said herself that she would not have a baby until she was 27, and now she is 28. We started to try 2 years ago, but not persistently so that we could work on it for a year. We went to Turkey especially for this purpose, to change the situation. I am sure that you will succeed. Max supported him. Betty and I have been working hard for 10 years. We have spent so much effort and money, but it is worth it. You know, when I see our boys kicking their feet in the stomach, it makes my heart sink. Jacob, can you believe I'm a father? The news that Max and Betty were about to have twins inspired Jacob so much that he decided to talk to Adriana and ask her to take the matter more seriously. But there was 1 day left before the vacation was over. Jacob didn't want to do anything that day. He just lay on the couch and watched TV. Adriana had gone somewhere in the morning, so he just enjoyed his solitude. The man didn't want to think about anything. He was completely immersed in some nature program he was watching. He was so absorbed in the TV that he didn't notice his wife returning. Adriana was standing in front of the couch and was very nervous. Jacob, she called out to him, Jacob, I need to tell you something. The man looked at his wife's concerned face and turned off the television. What happened? He asked excitedly. Are you all pale? Jacob, I went to the doctor today. She started we're going to have a baby. You're pregnant? He said, Adriana in astonishment. We're having a baby. Oh my God, that's news. Jacob clutched his head. A real surprise. The next day, Jacob went to work. The fact that Adriana is expecting a baby so inspired him that the man just flew with happiness. Maria, is this for you? He handed his nurse a box of Turkish sweets. Can you get fat? I'll let you. Jacob, if I were 10 years younger, I'd never miss a guy like you. The nurse laughed. Thank you, darling, but be careful. The surgeon frowned playfully. You do not tell me such things. After all, I'm not only married now, but I'm going to be a father. Are you pregnant? In astonishment, said Maria. Wow, and congratulations from the bottom of my heart. Everything in Jacob, as if from the news, changed. He began to devote more time to his wife. Of course, it was impossible for him to spend a lot of time with her, but after work he tried to be with her every day. Not to say that Adriana was happy about it. The woman would have preferred to be alone more. Are you the one with the mood swings? Her husband told her. A very typical pregnancy condition. So be patient. If you feel like crying. But it's all business and in moderation. Don't get yourself worked up. I can imagine what will happen to me when Adriana starts sobbing like that. I'll have no one to care about then. It's not that bad, replied her husband. And not every pregnant woman has strong mood swings. Many just have morning sickness, and that's it. So let's not create problems for ourselves in advance. It's easy for you to say you're unhappy, said the wife. It's not like you're pregnant. You will not believe it, but I would with you to change places. Agreed, laughed the man. And Idle would lie around all day and from his work would rest. But unfortunately, only women give birth. All the grandparents were also very happy and were waiting impatiently for Adriana's belly to appear. The girl was very much annoyed by this, and lately she tried to stay at home and not go to her or Ethan's parents to visit. But that didn't stop them. So their parents themselves often traveled to their house to visit them. Jacob, I'm so sick of all these parties. One night my wife burst into tears. I just want to lie here and they're asking me what I ate today. How am I doing? Hell, I'll talk to your mom so they don't bother you so much. Jacob suggested it. You tell your mom that too, and say no hard feelings. But I don't want to see anyone right now. You're right. I'll call them, the girl replied. If I need to, I'll go to them myself, or I'll just get in the car to go somewhere and be alone. They're already here on the doorstep. So a month went by. Adriana never really started to get a strong kosa. Mostly her eating habits changed. She had a constant craving for hot pepper chips and snacks. At first, Jacob was in complete shock when she ate several packs a day of both. But after he consulted a good doctor, he calmed down. The main thing is that she's not throwing up or vomiting a lot, he said. Jacob, and this after the third, fourth month will pass, so let her eat. Despite the fact that the mood changed with supernatural speed, Jacob eventually got used to it. At times, the girl was simply unbearable. She often left home on the pretext that she needed to be alone. But none of this could not overshadow the joy of Ethan, and he was more and more tuned in to become a father. Max called a friend one day. How does it feel to be a father? To twins. You know, Jacob, I cannot tell you all this in one word, a friend said tiredly. It's not that there are pros and cons to everything. Just at first, such euphoria, and then, when they do not sleep at night, and you, which at night already does not sleep, it is difficult to say. Of course you love your kids anyway. But I'll tell you honestly, for me the biggest problem is not that they scream, but that you can't even calm them down at night. I don't know how Betty handles them all by herself. I'm still in the euphoric stage, he sighed. Although Adriana has a terrible temper, and she's always getting on my nerves. But I'm very happy about her pregnancy. So you take advantage of the moment to be happy, laughed Max. And then when the baby is born, you won't know where you can get away from it. I'll tell you this, friend. If you feel that you have become a father, then everything else is like the sea. Well, if by the birth of the child you do not realize it, then it will be difficult to get along with it all. My Tanya had no problems during her pregnancy, and she was only on the ward once. Not as much stress. We got away with it all. But the kids were born so restless for some reason, and nobody knows why. Jacob was mentally prepared to be a father. He'd been setting himself up for it all along. Instead of nature and travel shows, he studied different seminars for future fathers, read medical books on family psychology. In general, he had no intention of backing down and was preparing for his new role with all the responsibility he could muster. A nurse asked him one day, "He's getting serious. No jokes? You don't tell funny stories, Maria, but I have to grow up sometime. Teacher's morals," he replied. "I'm preparing for fatherhood." So what? You don't think you can laugh now? The nurse laughed. "You're like a big baby, for God's sake. Sometimes I can," he argued. "But how can I be an example to my child if I continue to be so unserious?" "You'd better laugh," the nurse smiled. "Otherwise your child will think from birth that it is not allowed to have fun and will grow up with some abnormalities." "Do you think you're in shock?" the doctor said. "I didn't think about it. It feels like you're pregnant, not your wife." Maria laughed. "You should have gotten yourself so worked up. You know, when I had my mumps, I had a real crush on my husband's jokes. He's a joker. As soon as he'd say something funny to me to distract me and make me laugh, I'd start crying. At first he couldn't understand what was wrong, and I couldn't explain it to him. On the contrary, he wants to cheer me up, but his jokes make me cry. Thank God, by the 5th month, my tantrums were over. Jack was born a healthy boy. He's 18 now and as humorous as his father. When they get together to laugh with them, you can sew, 'Let's not have your morning face.' I can't wait for Adriana to have the baby, and I'll run away from you before you do. Yeah, who's going to let you go? Jacob smiled. I can't do without you here. So don't even think that you and I will be carried out of here. He laughed. That's the same thing. Maria supported him. Now it's different. And I thought that I already began to lose my Jasoba. From that day, Jacob began to treat his wife's pregnancy as easier, and it became easier for him. About 3 weeks later, the head doctor called them all together. It was a big meeting. There were a lot of questions. We had to solve something with the new equipment. It was scheduled to arrive next week. The Ministry of Health had come up with some new innovations. We had to put them into circulation. All in all, it was a tough day. There were no scheduled surgeries until this afternoon. And no emergencies yet. Jacob and his colleague David were discussing something in his office. Maria made them tea, so they'll send someone from the department to get the new equipment up and running. The nurse asked with interest, or do we have to guess how it works? That's the thing, David sighed. They were supposed to send Ethan and me for training, but because of the lack of money, we're going to have to figure it out on our own. It's like kindergarten, for God's sake. Jacob scolded, as if we were playing in a sandbox. And what if this machine during the operation will stop or somewhere their switches? And we don't know about it. They don't have any brains in there, or they don't care, answered his colleague. They are all theorists there. Do you think in this Ministry of Health anyone like you and me stood at the operating table for so many hours? So you cannot even count on their understanding. All right, but it's not far from malpractice. The doctor couldn't calm down. I've got a baby on the way, and I can't even deal with this gang. Well, we'll deal with it ourselves. David said tiredly, You heard what the chief said. They'll send us detailed instructions along with the equipment. He swore like hell. We've been waiting so many years for a new machine. And now, when it arrives, we won't know what to do with it. Actually, it should be brought by an engineer and some doctor who is already using it. A nurse intervened. You know, Maria, they don't owe us anything. Sighed the elderly surgeon. Their duty is to demand from us and meet the deadlines they set. It's the same thing every time. Once a surgeon becomes chief of surgery, after a couple of months, he forgets what kind of workload is there. How hard it is for us to meet all their deadlines. He's been suffering from it himself and wanted to leave. Instead of the previous one, now he's becoming a tyrant himself. David was finishing his tea when Ethan's phone rang. A text came in. The man reached into his pocket and opened some kind of video. After a few minutes, he turned pale. A video and 3 pictures came to his phone with his wife in them. Jacob ran out of the office. No, it can't be. Pale lips, he said. This is some kind of setup. The man was no professional, but he thought both the photos and the video were believable. As the photos showed Adriana with some man having intimacy at their villa. Jacob could not understand how he should react to all this. Was it all true, or had it all been set up for some purpose? He was in complete prostration for a few minutes, but then it came to him from the deepest depths that he urgently needed to go to the cottage. David, out of breath, ran into the office. I'm asking you to cover for me. I need to leave urgently. I'm in trouble. Did something happen to Adriana? The doctor said excitedly. She fell. That's all Jacob could manage to say. I'll work for you later. Maria, stay with David. The nurse and the doctor gave the man a concerned look. He was very nervous and not himself. If I go in a straight line now, it will take me about 40 minutes, Jacob told himself. Shouldn't I call her first? Maybe someone had set this up on purpose. He stopped. He was torn in different directions. On the one hand, he wanted to call. On the other hand, he wanted to check it out. Well, let's say it's all a lie. Jacob started the car. Then I'll go to the cottage and find no one. Then I'll start to find out what it was. But if Jacob's heart seemed to go through that thought, the man's heart began to pound frantically. But if it's true, and she is there, I'll catch her in the act, he whispered, wiping lines of cold sweat from his face. All the way he was trying to find out if she was cheating on him with someone else or not. His brain was just exploding at the thought. But other than this video and pictures, he had no proof, which meant it could all be a lie. Jacob. He had performed many difficult surgeries in his life. But what happened to him then was his greatest challenge. He had never experienced such fear. The man decided to leave his car at the beginning of the street so that no one would recognize him. He had to walk another 500 meters. He walked cautiously, looking around. He felt like he was a criminal. God, when am I going to get there? Nervous, he said to himself. This all seems like bullshit. He turned onto his street and was simply stunned. His wife's car was parked outside their house. Jacob stood like a stumbling block and could not move further feet softer. He almost fell. The man sat down on some bench outside the house he was standing next to. He felt like his heart was going to jump out. I must find out the truth, he said to himself, and slowly got up from the bench and walked towards the cottage. Jacob cautiously crept up to the fence. The gate was locked. The windows on the first floor were for what arena, and nothing could be seen. The man strode around the back. The neighboring villa was long abandoned. He crept slowly up from the garden side. One foot caught, and he could barely keep his balance. Finally, Jacob was outside the house. He slowly turned the handle of the small door that led from the small shed into the house. Taking off his shoes on his socks, he walked down the hallway. The door to the living room on the first floor was open. Jacob pressed himself against the wall and crawled sideways along it. The closer he got, the clearer some sounds became. Finally, he began to recognize voices. Adriana, well, will you stop playing games? The man said grudgingly. We've been hiding from everyone for so many years. It's been almost a year since I got divorced. Sweetheart. But now, until I give birth to a child, I cannot tell her anything or her. The man heard his wife's voice. You think I'm not tired of all this? If it hadn't been for my father, I wouldn't have married him at all. But after Europe, he didn't want to wait, you see. It all hit him hard, and he had to rebuild his reputation. So I went into marriage with Ethan. Do you know how much I regret it? Well, what are you going to tell him now? The stranger sighed. I mean, you're pregnant. I don't know, Kevin. Adriana answered. That's why I'm asking you to wait. Maybe in time something will change. I love you, the man replied. I can't live without you anymore. Neither can I. She kissed him. Be patient for a while. I'll think of something. Jacob at first wanted to fly into the room and tear it all down, but then he changed his mind. He left the house as carefully as he came in. He climbed over the back of the neighboring cottage and blinked stealthily to the beginning of the street. At that moment, Jacob did not want to think about anything. He only wanted to scream at the top of his voice. The pain stiffened his heart as well, so that it became difficult for him to breathe. What kind of a fool was I? He finally burst into tears, getting into his car. After all, she never loved me. I had made it all up, but why? Does it make me feel better that she lied to me all those years? On the contrary, I'm in unbearable pain right now. Jacob drove and drove. He didn't know which direction to go. He just wanted to drive into some foggy place, disappear forever. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening when the man began to regain consciousness. He was very thirsty. His stomach was sticking out a lot. He stopped the car and got out to stretch his legs. Looked at the navigator. Jacob had driven almost 200 kilometers. Oh God, where am I? He looked around. I don't even know these places. After hitting the waters a bit, the man sat down in his seat. The door to the car was open. The evening brought a bit of a chill. So it's all true, and I can't deny it, he said loudly. I wondered what I should do with this truth. Jacob clutched his head and sat like that for a while. But no matter how hard it was for him, he had to make a decision. Now the question arises, whose child is it, mine or his? The man thought, what am I supposed to do with all this? I can't live with myself after this, that's for sure. No matter how much I love her. It just doesn't make any sense, because she doesn't love me, to tell me everything that happened today and right now or to wait for the right moment. It's not like I can play it off like nothing happened. The man stepped out and wandered toward the field. The evening grass filled his lungs with freshness and coolness. For a while, Jacob even forgot where he was and what had happened to him. But he brought it back quickly. I need to wait for a while, Jacob decided. Maybe I can find out whose baby it is. Then all these issues will be easier to deal with. If it's Kevin's, then the divorce will be painless. But if it's my child, then her parents will get on my nerves, maybe even threaten me. So I need to buy some time to learn about everything and have arguments on my hands. Then her father will have nothing to say to me. I'll keep the video and the photos. And then the man turned pale. Until that moment, the thought of who it could be had never even crossed his mind. But then who knows that Adriana has a lover? Shocked, he said, "Who sent me all those pictures?" Jacob quickly ran to the car, picked up his phone, dialed the number from which the video and photos had come, but it was blocked. Naturally, no one would send such photos to the police from his personal number. The man said with annoyance in his voice, "But if you think about it, who could it be? Probably one of my employees." "Yeah, no one at my workplace has ever seen Adriana. Only Maria, and that's on a photo taken on a cell phone. And no one knows about our cottage. Well, they know we have one, but I've never told anyone the exact address. With work, I guess it's all a dead end. Nobody here cares much about me. Then maybe it's just one person taking revenge. Maybe Kevin's not her first man. Then it's very likely that he's been following her and knows where our villa is and when she and her lover go there. I don't have any other options yet. It looks like Adriana's revenge, and I'm the bargaining chip in this whole thing. But maybe it's for the best. It's not a question of how many men she had while we were married. It's the fact that she didn't love me, and if I continue to pursue this line now, that man in the photo will not rest. He's going to look at my reaction now, and then he's going to send me more proof, because he's going to have to prove to me that Adriana really cheated on me. Yeah, the best thing for me to do in this situation is to wait." Despite the fact that Jacob regained some composure, the man was in a lot of pain. He was well aware that after what he had seen, he would no longer be able to hide his anger. Jacob made up a story that he had some serious problems at work, so he did not want to see anyone anytime soon. The man was on his way home. It was getting late when his phone rang. "Jacob, where are you? Did you hear Adriana's voice? It's 10 o'clock. "Yes, we had a serious problem at work. It's cold," he answered. "I'll be there in about an hour." "Hell, I'm sorry, but I don't want to see anyone right now," he added and disconnected the phone. He was afraid that if he continued to talk to his wife, he wouldn't be able to stand it and would tell her everything. He would never know the truth. Finally, the familiar scenery flashed outside the window. Jacob pulled into Chicago. The closer he got to the house, the more he shuddered. Because of her pregnancy, Adriana slept in her room. And that, for Ethan, was a good thing. He realized that he would have to make a great effort not to give himself away. And to do that, he needed to see Adriana as little as possible right now. The car pulled into the courtyard. Jacob almost collapsed outside the house from fatigue and overexertion. He gathered all his strength and went inside the house. Everywhere was dark, and the man realized that his wife was already asleep. "Well, thank God," he muttered. "And tomorrow I'll get up for work, and she won't see me. And now she's up late." Despite his hunger, Jacob went straight to his bedroom. He didn't even have the energy to think, so he immediately fell into sleep. It was almost 7 o'clock a.m. when Jacob woke up. He walked into the kitchen. The servants were not there yet. Had a coffee and a sandwich and got his things. Went to the hospital. Maria hadn't arrived yet, and to distract himself, Jacob started filling out patient files. "How did you suddenly say someone's voice behind his back?" "Jacob, are you okay?" Concerned asked the nurse, seeing the pale face of the surgeon. "Is something wrong?" "Maria, yes. Everything is fine. Barely pronounced sleep. It's okay. I was so nervous. And I was up all night with her too. But the main thing is that everything is all right," stroked on the shoulder of the surgeon. "Maria, are you going to be able to work today?" He tried to smile. "David won't be able to fill in for me all the time." "Well, that's true," confirmed the nurse. "Although yesterday he and I rested most of the day. We had one open fracture and a shattered head with a concussion." "Well, that's good." "I was getting worried that David had gotten a kick out of me yesterday," Jacob replied. "It must be your bad luck," she laughed. "How's your shift going?" "We're in trouble." Anna Sergeyevna James was the second daughter of a famous rich man. As a girl, she grew up willful and capricious. From childhood, she pulled the whole blanket on herself, because the family formed the opinion that all her needs and desires must be fulfilled. Father, by the way, was not against it. He was impressed by her inexhaustible energy and desire to live. Adriana could sometimes behave recklessly, for which from time to time got into some unpleasant stories. Her passion was not only movement, learning something new, but also the attention of other people. It became a real drug for the girl. Adriana went crazy when people bowed before her, when they ran after her, when they could not live without her. When the girl studied in Europe, she learned to manipulate people quite well. So many guys who went crazy about her were dizzy. The girl herself was just playing with them. That's how it was with Mike at first. He was the son of very rich parents, and as it turned out, he was spoiled even more than Adriana. The girl had heard about him for a long time and wanted to get to know him better. Naturally, she was not particularly interested in simple guys on such. She just practiced her seduction skills. But for marriage, the girl considered only a guy from a very rich family, Mike. She had already seen him several times before she met him, and she liked him. The guy was really good. When they first met at a party, Adriana did her best to attract Mike to her, and she succeeded. The guy quickly became interested in her. 2 weeks later, they started dating. Adriana first tried to reform Mike. He was irresponsible, and the relationship was never serious. But then his father and mother got involved. They liked the idea that Adriana could marry Mike, so his father had a very serious talk with the guy. Adriana and the guy dated for almost 3 years when the wedding date was set, but she always knew that he had someone on the side all the time. Before the wedding, the girl gave him an ultimatum. Mike wasn't used to that kind of thing. He turned out to be a pretty violent and vindictive guy. "Mike, you have to realize that your free relationship is over," Adriana said to the guy. "You're gonna get married soon, and you're gonna have a family. Adriana, you don't have to tell me how to live my life." He looked at her angrily. "I decide how I want to live my life. If you don't like it, get out. Are you out of your mind?" The girl got angry. "I'll tell your father everything. Let's see how you sing when he takes everything away from you. Don't cross me." He stared intently into her eyes. "I won't spare you, Adriana. Don't play games with me. We'll see about that." Furious, she shouted, "I'll talk to your parents. I think you have a lot to lose, so you'll listen to them." Mike was not used to being told what he should do. Even his parents couldn't influence him. But the guy realized that Adriana could blackmail him and make his parents take everything away from him for a while until he changed. His parents were on her side. "All right, Adriana, I'll show you how fast I got rid of you," clenched his fists. After their conversation, the guy did just that. At the wedding, Adriana and her parents were completely embarrassed. Her father was just freaking out at the time. He really didn't know what to do, as circles on the water quickly spread rumors that Adriana, the daughter of one of the richest people, turned out to be an ordinary wench. Father was going crazy in those days. The only thing he could see was to marry off his daughter urgently. Of course, from his circle, no one would have agreed to such a thing back then. So they had to find a decent family for Adriana's temporary marriage, so to speak. At the time, it didn't matter who it was. He had a few guys in mind, but Adriana chose the son of an old surgeon Ethan knew. "Adriana, I don't care," he told his wife. "The important thing is that he marries Adriana officially now, and then we'll look for a suitable match for her." "James, but we are taking such a risk," the wife replied. "What if they have children? Then no one will marry a decent family. That's what you'll do with her," replied the man. "Though you all will tell you what doctor to visit and how to protect her from unwanted pregnancy." "Lucy, I want to solve all this in a year. 2 at the most, no more." Adriana's wedding was modest. There were only her parents and a few other acquaintances from Jacob's side of the family. It had happened so fast that not Max, Ethan's friend, not Emily and Adriana's sister could make it. You could tell it was a private ceremony. A year later, Adriana's parents had already found the right person for her. Kevin was the son of a banker. Their fortune was estimated only much less than James's. The guy had married an ordinary Italian woman a few years ago. He had studied in Italy for 5 years, and when it came time to play the wedding to the girl his parents had picked up for him, he found himself already married. His parents gave him a huge scandal and even disowned him. This Kevin did not embarrass Kevin in the slightest, and he continued to live his life. In Italy, he worked so that he had no problems with the maintenance of his family. One day, the Kevins were visiting James and told him about how their son lives now. "It's such a shame. Such shame," through tears, Kevin's mother said. "We still can't get over it. Maybe you should introduce him to a nice girl." Lucy mother Adriana came up with an amazing idea. "Maybe he'll like her and forget about your Italian, Kevin." "Where are we going to find one of those?" sighed the boy's father. "And all the nice unmarried girls will wait for him, won't they? Now we have to run after him and woo him to make him forget his Italian. You know, Liam, we have Adriana living with that surgeon too." Through tears, said James. "It was such a mistake to marry her off to a simple man. It's been a year now, and my girl is just dying, I told her after Europe. And my daughter, wait, your man will come along." And she wanted to take revenge on Mike and married the first man she met. You know how my heart aches for her. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my daughter. She's already so sorry. She wants her surgeons to divorce her. She says if I could find a good guy who could love me, I'd leave my husband Jacob right away. "Yes, you're in the same trouble," sighed Mrs. Kavina. "Why didn't our children meet before? Maybe then they would have found their happiness in each other? Or maybe it's not too late," cautiously said Lucy. "We're going to Italy to our villa in a month. We could invite Kevin to stay with us." "That's not a bad idea," his eyes sparkled. "Why don't you bring your daughter? Let them get to know each other." Everything was ready to leave for Italy. James called his daughter Adriana to him. "This is your chance." He looked at her sternly. "You didn't miss it. Kevin is the son of very wealthy people, and being related to a banker will be good for us. I can do business with him." "Dad, all right." My daughter looked at him. "Let's say we like each other. Then what am I supposed to do with Ethan? What about your daughter? What could be the problem with him?" The man laughed. "We'll file for divorce right away. If Ethan makes any claims against me, I'll give him money. That'll keep him quiet, especially after he stopped practicing because of his illness. That kind of money will do him good." James was from the village, but the race for more money had changed him so much that he had forgotten that he had once been such a simple fellow. Now he saw himself as an overlord who could make or buy anyone. Ethan and his son were just things he had used, and now he could throw away. So in Italy, Kevin's first meeting with Adriana had been a success. At least that's how it seemed to the girl's young father. "It's strange," Kevin thought. "I don't know them, and they talk to me like I was a good friend. Maybe their father sent them." After the first meeting, he was impressed, not by Adriana, but by everything that had happened. James asked him to go with them to Sicily for a weekend, and he agreed. He had only been there once before. He wanted to visit those places again. Adriana said, breathing in the air of Sicily, "How beautiful it is here. Kevin, I even envy you. Can you come here every weekend?" "It's not that simple, Adriana," he objected. "I have to work. That's why I don't always have enough time or money to travel. We rent a place in the Dominican Republic. We don't have our own place yet. Doesn't your father help you?" "Watch out," asked the girl. "Uncle Liam, as far as I know, is a rich man." "Yes, he has a lot of money," sighed the boy. "But I don't need it. I chose my own happiness. My parents didn't support me in that. And I understand you," Adriana replied with annoyance in her voice. "I was in the same situation. When I got married to a simple surgeon, my parents stopped talking to me. I was just torn and metal. But as time went on, I realized they were right. Ethan and I are so different that I'm just unhappy with him. And you're okay with that life?" "No," but Kevin looked at her. "I love the Dominican Republic. I don't care what my parents think. It is difficult, of course, to live on my own after a fully provided for life, but I am coping so far." That day they visited the most beautiful places in Sicily, swooning in the sea. And she was all right. A thought flashed through Kevin's mind. What am I talking about? He quickly stopped himself, but after that day, the James family with Kevin became a good tradition to go somewhere on the weekend. The Russians spent exactly 1 month at their villa. James, thank you very much for the communication, for our meetings. The guy shook the man's hand in farewell. I was very glad to meet you. Mutually, Igor hugged him. James, you turned out to be a good guy. I don't know why your parents are so upset with you. I wouldn't let a son like that go anywhere. The James family. They so unobtrusively got into Kevin's soul that after they left, the guy couldn't come to his senses for a long time. He felt like he was missing something. A few weeks passed, and he decided to give James Nikolaevich a call. Igor, hello. James rejoiced. I'm so glad to hear from you. How are you doing? How is Italy? Everything is fine, answered the guy. And how are you doing? How's it going? We are doing well so far, thank God, replied the man. Adriana is suffering though. If you want, I'll give you her phone number. Maybe she'll talk to you. We were so happy that our girl in Italy came back to life, but as soon as we got home, she is again always alone and won't let anyone near her. Well, okay, Kevin replied. Maybe I cheered her up a little. The guy didn't even notice that he had tied a noose around his neck. Talking to Adriana on the phone made her even more attractive, and when Adriana flew to the villa, the next thing you know, they were having an affair. The girl got everything she dreamed of. Kevin was really after her. He took risks. Adriana became an object of adoration for him. For about a year, the girl flew to Italy every 2 or 3 months. But Kevin was not going to divorce his Italian wife yet. James realized that he just had to bide his time. After a year and a half, Kevin filed divorce papers. Adriana hoped that in a couple of months, she would already be able to divorce Ethan and marry Kevin. But Dominika went on principle and created a lot of problems for Kevin. Therefore, they divorced with scandals and constant lawsuits. It took almost 2 years. Finally, all the documents were received, and Kevin could return to his family. His parents lived in New York, and he left Italy to continue his father's business. Kevin's child was madly happy that their son finally understood everything and made the right choice in his life. When Kevin came to New York, he and Adriana found it easier to see each other. He started coming to Chicago often. Sometimes he and Adriana would meet at her parents' house. But most of all, they preferred the privacy of their villa. It was the old Villa James that her father had given to his daughter for her wedding. Therefore, Adriana felt at home there. The girl found out that she was pregnant weeks before she and her husband went to Turkey. So she set everything up. So she and Ethan made everything work out. While on vacation, her husband didn't count the days much, so he went along with everything right away. It was impossible to tell that Adriana and Kevin were planning a baby. It looked as if it had happened by accident. But the girl knew for sure that the baby was from him with Ethan. She had been on birth control pills for all the years, so she couldn't get pregnant with him. Adriana realized that now she would have to deal with the Ethan issue, and her father had already insisted on it. But she had her own reason for delaying the divorce, which neither of them knew. James was born and raised in a small village. He came from a poor family. As a teenager, he fell in love with a neighbor girl, Katya. Therefore, when the guy was 20 years old, his choice was already determined. It must be said that James was a young man with great ambitions. In the village, he did not want to stay. And after the wedding, he and Kate immediately moved to the city. The first years of life in the city were very difficult for them. James got a job as a laborer in the road service and quickly mastered the work of road machines. The boy realized that this industry can be a bottomless one. Old roads are being repaired and new ones are being built all the time. So he rented a roller and grader and hired a few guys. After a year, he was already able to buy back his equipment. After a couple more years, he had his own road construction company. This could stop and live well, but the ambitious guy wanted to go even further. He invested all his money in an engineering plant. 10 years later, James, aged 35, became the owner of one of the largest road construction equipment factories in the world. Perhaps he was lucky in life. Perhaps it was his inflexibility that helped him, but he did get his way, and everything would have gone on as it was if Kate hadn't died. Their first daughter was born when Kate was almost 28 years old. Their life was full of stress, so they could not have children earlier. After the birth of their daughter, the girl could not recover for a long time, and a year later she was diagnosed with cancer. James what only did not do, but to save his wife he never managed. It cannot be said that the young man was heartbroken. Sure, he grieved for a while, but James became so addicted to money that it became for him the only goal in life. It was almost 2 years later when he began to think about getting married. His little daughter Emily was under the care of a governess all the time. In this, the man knew no problems, but he wanted to have a solid status in society, and his condition as a widower did not help him in any way. Even then, James began to think about a girl from a rich family. "I've already reached such horizons that I don't need a wire anymore," he told himself looking in the mirror. "I've worked so hard to get to a position in society that I'm not going to fall for any romance." James once at a call at a nobleman's party, he said that he was going to marry and was looking for a suitable candidate. Naturally, the girl had to be from a rich family, well-bred, educated. The rumor reached William's house. He had a daughter named Lucy, but she was so spoiled that her parents had been unable to marry her for nearly 7 years. The girl's temper was simply unbearable. "Lucy, listen to me," the father said to his daughter. "This is your last chance. Do what you want, but this James forget. Here's another crossed her arms on her chest girl. I don't need this redneck. Then I'll marry you off tomorrow to the first man I see." In a rage, said the man, "You understand me, and you will get nothing more from us." Lucy saw that her father was not joking and was very frightened with her demands. To stay with some beggar on the street for her was tantamount to death. The girl repeated for several more days, but her father did not give up his position. Then Lucy tried to manipulate her mother. "Don't even think that I will ask your father for you." Coldly, she replied, "You've gotten on our nerves so much that I'll be the first. Who's going to kick you out of the house?" "Mom, but he has a daughter." I tried to find the right argument. "You didn't want the guys we offered you all those years ago," my mother said angrily. "They didn't have any children. Now you have to solve this problem yourself." The acquaintances organized a dinner, or rather, a viewing for James and Lucy. The girl tried to restrain her arrogance. She herself realized that at her age, and she was already 28, it's not easy to find a guy who matches her needs. You could say it was an official marriage of convenience. It was a big wedding. The father was so happy to finally get rid of his daughter that he spared no money for the wedding. At first, Lucy thought that Emily would be a big problem for her. But to her happiness, the girl grew up very calm. She lent herself well to the education of her nannies. Yes, and James, her husband, did not spend much time with his daughter. His new wife didn't see the girl as much. At this stage, things were going well for Lucy. She didn't have to make a scene when her husband spent too much time with her daughter. But as Emily began to grow older, she, like any teenager, began to show interest in all areas of life. When Adriana Lucy was born, they immediately separated her from her older sister. Therefore, strange as it may sound, the children did not see each other that often. When Adriana was 8 years old, she had her first scandal. Emily and her toys were playing in the garden. The girl ran up to her, started throwing her toys around the sides of the llama bee doll's hands. "What are you doing?" Shocked, shouted Emily. "Why are you breaking my dolls?" "Yours," laughed 8-year-old Adriana. "Nothing here is yours. Everything here is mine. Get out of here. This is my house too," protested her sister. "Give me my dolls. Leave me alone." "Ah, so evil," shouted Adriana. "Are you gonna get it now?" She started yelling with all her might. It felt like she was being cut. After 5 minutes, the mother came running, and "Daughter, what happened?" She asked worriedly and looked angrily at Emily. "She took my dolls and started breaking them," screamed the girl, "and then she hit me." "Are you out of your mind?" Furious, said Lucy. "Go to your room. I won't let you play in the garden anymore." That evening, there was a scandal between husband and wife. Lucy did not want to give up her position. "Wherever you want her and take her," she shouted. "But she won't be in our house anymore." "Lucy, she's my daughter," James replied sternly. No need to throw words around. Okay, then Adriana and I will leave this house today, calmly replied his wife. In a few days I will send you the divorce papers. All right, the husband got angry. I will send Emily to a boarding house in Italy. James finally gave in. After the daughter from her first marriage was expelled from the house, Adriana became a real mistress there. The first time Emily was able to be at home was not until she was 16. The father invited his daughter home for summer vacation, so she showed up. Adriana greeted her. No one was expecting you here. I came to see my father, not you. I tried to talk some sense into my little sister Emily, so don't let it bother you. But Adriana couldn't accept it. Every day she thought of something to do. The girl would put the ice cream on the chair, locked her door so she couldn't get out, threw a fly or a spider in her plate. Adriana, when are you going to calm down? Emily once said to her, don't you realize I don't need any of this? You can have this house and your father's wealth. You're the one who doesn't understand me, she shouted angrily. I just hate you. I would be the happiest person in the world if I could see you dead now. At your funeral, I would have laughed for a very long time. Why did Adriana hate Emily so much? She didn't know. But she sensed some inner strength in her sister, and it hurt her deeply. Adriana had always known that she was really a coward. She was a worthless girl. Adriana would never be able to survive without her father and his money. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to be able to adapt to everything. No other country frightened her. Not like at the boarding house, where the children were treated very strictly. Adriana had always felt that compared to her older sister, she looked like a pacifier. That was probably one of the reasons why the girl wanted adoration. In the back of her mind, she was afraid that any guy would choose Emily over her. After that visit, Emily did not appear at her father's house for a long time. Yes, and the girl entered the institute and all her attention focused on her studies. Even though Adriana had already studied in Europe and her father's house no longer attracted her. But on her sister's 20th birthday, her father insisted that his eldest daughter came to her birthday party. Adriana resisted this for a long time. She even argued with her father, but he did not change his decision. Let them finally establish a normal relationship with each other, her father thought. Adriana had changed a little during this time. She stopped feeling so much aggression towards her sister. In the first place, everyone confirmed that the girl was much prettier than Emily. In the second place, all the numerous fans of Adriana, whom she had broken her heart in Europe, gave her some self-confidence. Hello, sister. She greeted Emily snidely. I hope you're not here for long. And I'm glad to see you, Adriana calmly replied Emily. Unfortunately, I can only stay here for a few days. We have a summer internship at the institute. I can't miss it. That's good, Adriana said cheerfully. I think I'll put up with you for a few days. There were a lot of people at Adriana's birthday party. Her mother wanted to show everyone how much her daughter had grown up. Emily sat alone, far away from everyone. She didn't know any of the guests. Suddenly, she saw Ethan's familiar face. She said excitedly, How happy am I to see you? And this must be Jacob. Don't you remember me? You and I together tied the bloody paw of one dog. Emily said in amazement, Honestly, you've changed a lot. How are you doing? I hear you are studying in Italy. The girl and the boy talked about something for a long time. They reminisced about their childhood and the few times they had met together. Emily was very sweet and open. Jacob hadn't expected that from her. At all. Emily's father didn't talk about her much. All his hopes and plans were connected with Adriana. Suddenly, the host appeared on the stage, and the party began. A few minutes later, the birthday girl came up to him as well. God was amazed. Boy, this Adriana. Yeah, she's a real hottie. Emily wanted to continue the conversation with Ethan, but it was as if he wasn't listening to her anymore. All his attention was absorbed by Adriana. The girl saw how he approached her and told her something admiringly. A few days later, Jacob showed up at their yard. Jacob, hello. She ran out to meet him. Emily, you're coming to visit us. Where is Adriana? The guy asked the girl. She's at home. I'd like to take her for a walk. Is she on the phone with someone at home? Answered Emily. let's go have some lemonade and talk about something. She took her guest by the hand. They were laughing merrily when Adriana appeared on the terrace. She had a very displeased look on her face. But seeing how happy Emily was, the girl decided to take advantage of the situation. "Jacob, why don't we go for a ride together?" She laughed. "Come on, hurry up, take my hand and let's go." The guest wanted to say something to Emily, but Adriana pulled him forward so much that he had to look under his feet not to fall. Good boy, Jacob, Emily thought. Why is Adriana doing all this? After all, she's going to play with him and leave him. The next day, Emily flew to Italy. The girl did not notice that she began to think about her acquaintance all the time. Jacob seemed to her that guy about whom only one can dream. She felt care and inner strength and tenderness in him. They liked the way he recited poetry. He had a sensitive nature. Adriana could never understand such a man. She favored brute external force. She liked to control and manipulate people. Emily realized that neither her father nor her mother would go through with the marriage. As much as Jacob loved Ode, and it brought the girl relief. The next summer, the girl decided to fly home for a visit. Adriana was there at the same time. God, but you could not at least wait until the end of August. Adriana greeted her sister unhappily. "You've ruined my summer." "Don't worry, I won't be here for long." She greeted her sister. That evening, Jacob arrived at their house. Emily happily ran out to meet him. "Jacob, hello. How happy am I to see you?" "Rejoiced, girl. How are you doing?" "Hi, Emily." Smiling, he replied. "I did not know that you came." "I'm fine. How are you?" "Well, Jacob, let's go." Adriana deliberately interrupted their conversation. "We have no time to waste." Jacob wanted to talk to his mother some more, but excused himself and went after her sister. They returned from their walk. A few hours later, Jacob was very upset. And even on the contrary, Adriana was smiling all the time. Why all this circus? Strictly looked at her sister at her. "If you don't have any feelings for Jacob, why are you making a dog out of him? What's it to you?" Her sister laughed into her eyes. "Or are you jealous of me?" "Jacob is a good guy," Emily argued. "He has a pure and vulnerable soul. You're picking on him on purpose, aren't you? Why are you so angry?" Adriana said coldly. "What do you care about him? Jacob deserves better than you." Calmly replied the girl. "What is angry, sister? Are you saying that I don't deserve him? And who is worthy of you?" She laughed hysterically. "Jesus, I think I'm beginning to realize you've fallen in love with him. Of course, you couldn't have expected anything better." Emily could only fall in love with some surgeon. "Yes, I love Jacob," Emily said confidently and made a fatal mistake. "All right, let's see if he chooses you." Adriana replied snidely. "I'll even bet he'll always run after me like a dog." "Did you realize that? Get out of here. I hate you so much." Emily wanted to fly to Italy the same day, but the tickets were gone. She was wandering down the street when Ethan's car came around the corner. "Emily," he stopped his car. "I want to tell her to her face. I love her. Do you understand that?" "Jacob, are you drunk?" the girl asked in fright. "Come on, let's go home." Emily quickly got into the front seat and tried to get Jacob to turn the car around. "If you want to talk to Adriana, we need to turn around." Trying to slyly take it, she did. "Let me show you. Once we get there, I'll take you straight to her." "Yes, you will help me behind the flying tongue," replied the boy. "I beg you, help me, I can't live without her." They had almost reached Ethan's house when he turned the other way and stopped the car in a wooded area. It was already dark outside. "Adriana, I came up to you, Jacob and your daughter. I love you so much. Come to me, darling." The guy embraced Emily and began to kiss her passionately. The girl at first wanted to break out of his embrace, but then realized that perhaps she would never see him again. "I'd rather be with someone I love once in my life than with someone I don't love," she whispered. An hour later, Emily got behind the wheel and brought Jacob home. She took him out of the car and sat him on a bench near the yard. The girl knocked loudly on the gate several times and hid behind a bush of a neighbor's house. Ethan went outside and saw a drunk Jacob. "Jacob," said his father in shock, "are you drunk?" "That's what I'm talking about, son." Come on, let's go. Emily got home late. She was overwhelmed with such happiness. She didn't want to see a single face at home, so the girl came home already at midnight. And the next day at 7 o'clock a cab was waiting for her and took her to the airport in New York. As soon as Emily found out that she was pregnant, she immediately told her father. It made no sense to her to hide it. "Emily, why have you embarrassed me like this?" James lamented. "What am I going to tell people now?" "You will," she replied calmly. "My daughter fell in love with a simple boy, and I wouldn't let her marry him. What an asshole." Lucy Vladimirovna was angry. "How can you be so ungrateful, Jamesa? Stop babysitting her. I demand that you forbid her to come home. Let her stay in her Italy." Despite what happened to Mom, James didn't wish his daughter harm. But he did what his wife said. They were forbidden to come to the USA. Her father gave her a villa in Italy for the first time, and her mother took a sabbatical at the Institute and finished it when Sophia was born. The father helped his daughter financially all this time. A year later, Emily learned that Adriana was marrying Jacob. The girl was very hurt by this, but she realized that the guy needed time to see who Adriana really was. At their wedding, naturally, she was not present. Emily felt that no one but Ethan held any interest in her. She transferred all her love for him to their baby girl, Sophia. A year passed after Adriana returned to the USA and got married. Suddenly, Emily's father informed her that they were all flying to Italy together. The girl did not know why, but she got a bad feeling from this news. Everyone arrived at the villa. Emily did not really want to communicate with her relatives, so she and her daughter tried to go somewhere for a while. And everyone looked coldly at the girl. "Emily, we have an important guest tomorrow." Her father once told her, "I'd like to ask you not to interfere in our affairs." "I don't care at all." Dryly, she replied, "I don't have to be there at all." "No, you must be present." Father replied sternly, "And remember, you're divorced. Your rich husband left you for a mistress." At first, the girl couldn't understand what it all meant. But after the meeting with the important guest, everything began to fall into place. My God, are they marrying Adriana to Kevin? Horrified, she thought. Emily hadn't been on all of their trips. But before they flew back, she did approach her father. "Dad, what's this all about?" She asked him bluntly. "Are you imposing on Adriana, Kevin?" "Emily, but you are a grown woman and should realize that Jacob is not suitable for us." Father answered calmly. "He has already fulfilled his role, and I am very grateful to him for that. But it's time for Adriana to look for a better husband. Kevin's parents are very rich, and he has connections." The father looked at his daughter. "Is that any way to play with people? Jacob, he's not a toy. He's not a thing. That's no way to treat people. Do you understand that? Emily, not crossing the line." James looked at her angrily. "You're talking to me, girl, who's with some beggar. Just for the fun of it. Don't piss me off, or you and your freaks will stay on the street. Don't call Sophia that." The daughter answered boldly. "Thank God, Mom didn't live to see what a monster you've turned into. I don't want anything from you. I give you exactly 3 years." Her father approached her in a rage, so that not you, not this one, would be in my life. "You understand me. In 3 years, you leave my villa." Emily was in shock from the conversation with her father. She couldn't believe he could have changed so much. Everything human in him seemed to have died. There was nothing to hold on to. "If I am no longer your daughter," the girl sobbed, "I don't have a father anymore. As soon as I finish university, I will leave here at once." During the next year, Adriana constantly flew to Italy and lived in a villa with her lover. During this time, Emily and her daughter only spent the night there. Finally, the girl could be put in daycare, and Emily returned not only to the institute, but also began to work. The girl studied to be an architect. After she learned that Kevin divorced his wife and moved to the USA, Emily became very worried. The girl was most afraid for Jacob. Her father had stopped feeling compassion for people, and she was afraid that he might do Jacob some harm. Almost a year passed, and she finally decided to come to the USA. Emily and her daughter looked at the old, shabby houses. It was her only possession. The house had belonged to her mother's parents long ago. When they died, her father deeded it to Emily. It's a wonderful home. You and I. The woman hugged her 4-year-old daughter. Sophia, do you feel okay with the accent? The little girl said. Emily finally received her diploma, and now she had to decide what to do next. She wanted to talk to Ethan right away and tell him everything about his daughter, Adriana's lovers, and the fact that he was just being used. But even before she left, she got a call from a woman who had worked as a maid in the house for many years, and who loved Emily like a daughter. Aunt Vanessa told her that Adriana was pregnant. The woman realized that there were a lot of unknowns in this whole story. The last time Adriana flew to the villa, a very unpleasant conversation took place between them. Adriana, why are you doing this to Ethan? He loves you. Emily started the conversation. You know, if it wasn't for you, I would have left him a long time ago. She laughed, just the joy of being hurt. Making me put up with him for so many years. You think I don't know Sophia is his daughter? She looks exactly like him. You thought if you slept with him, he'd be yours. But it didn't work out. You couldn't get back at me. You ended up losing everything. I'm going to drag it out until the end so I know how much you're suffering. Don't expect me to let him go so easily. You're probably dreaming that I'll divorce him, and he'll finally be yours. Adriana, Jacob, not a thing. Her older sister looked at her sternly. If I wanted him, I would have gotten him a long time ago. I have the most important trump card on my hands. If anything, Ethan and I have a child together. And once again, Emily's candor became her fatal mistake. Adriana had been thinking of ways to get Kevin pregnant ever since, but to make Jacob always think the child was his. So even when she divorces him, he will come to see the baby. And then Adriana can play with it over and over again. It took her almost a year to do it. The father was very angry. What's the matter? He said, we're all set to get married to Kevin. Dad, I need a little more time to deal with Ethan. Adriana replied. But after she got pregnant, her parents couldn't wait any longer. It was decided that if Adriana wouldn't tell, then James would then talk to Ethan's father and tell him everything in 2 months. The only problem was whether or not to say who Adriana had a child with. Where are you going with this? Adriana was angry with her father. You're ruining my business. No one really knew what it was all about. After the failed wedding in Europe, she had such a chance to take revenge on her sister that the girl was just glad. She didn't necessarily have to marry Jacob. Her father had picked other temporary options by then, but Adriana had insisted on him. Emily didn't have any particular plan. She just wanted to tell the truth. Jacob. But she knew she needed proof for this conversation. Her Aunt Vanessa had told her that Kevin had visited them often. It was clear from their conversations with Adriana that they liked to go to their old summer house. Before coming to the USA, Emily had talked to her good Italian friend Andrea. He did all sorts of video, communications, and hardware. So he told them at the time that detectives are not needed now. You just put bugs in and you're all set. In New York, the woman met a man who promised them to her. So all that was left was to arrive at the cottage without anyone noticing her and set it all up. Bye. It was a little hard to go to such things with her daughter. So she left her daughter at Aunt Vanessa's for one evening. Not bad at architecture, she quickly found the right place and discreetly set up a mini camera. Emily and her daughter lived in the village in the old house for the time being. Finally, after a few days on her laptop, the woman saw what was happening at Villa. She quickly cut a small video and took pictures using a SIM card she had bought in the USA. The woman sent everything to the right address. Ethan and Emily found the phone number easily. She called the hospital and made up a story that Jacob had asked her to call her back urgently, but his number wasn't answering. In this story, Emily was undergoing surgery. At first, no one wanted to reveal such information, but when the woman burst into tears, the nurse on duty could not stand it. It had been 3 days now, and Jacob just couldn't find a place to go. He wanted so badly to tell his wife everything, but he had a feeling that Anonymous would show up again. If it wasn't for the surgeries he had to focus on Man, it seemed like he would have lost his mind. But there was a great benefit to having some time to himself. Jacob went back over and over again and tried to figure out why he had gotten all this obsession. He reasoned about why he was attracted to them in the first place. He could see clearly now that she and he had always been radically different. He occasionally read some books, especially poetry, and watched informative movies, but his wife spent her days mindlessly. She seemed to have no purpose at all. Naturally, Adriana didn't work anywhere, but there was basically nothing to talk to her about. She never wanted to discuss serious topics. I don't even know why I married her. Finishing the operation, thought the surgeon, even after I found out she was pregnant. Adriana has absolutely no maternal feelings. She has always been interested only in her life. She's just obsessed with herself, and basically she's empty inside. God, I can't believe I never noticed that before. There's nothing inside her. It's like a pretty, shiny wrapper covering up an empty candy bar. At first it seems like there's bound to be a lot of value behind such a fanatic. But there's nothing there, nothing at all. That day, Ethan had a major turning point in his life. He realized that he had no love for Adriana and never had. She had simply shifted her gaze to his dream, and he believed it. In fact, they were so different that there had never been any point to their relationship. Even if she's carrying my child, the man told himself, I'll divorce her anyway. Adriana, as the dream of the perfect woman for me, was dead forever. I wanted to be deceived. Now I'm reaping the result. Thank God it all happened now and not when I'm 50 years old, and nobody will need me anymore. After all, somewhere there is my woman who will not only love me, but will be able to see me. Jacob was very reluctant to go home. Maria had already left, and he had stayed on the pretext of finishing his business. He rested his head on his hands and settled on his desk. He was about to fall into sleep when he heard distinctive sounds, grudgingly pulled out his phone. We need to meet tonight at 8 at the Faro Cafe. I sent you pictures of your wife. So he showed up after all, as I thought, said the doctor. All right, let's meet. Let's see what else you can tell me. Jacob left the hospital. He didn't want to be late. 7:45. He was already there. Hello, Jacob, said someone above his head. How are you doing? Emily? He said in astonishment. What are you doing here? Didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, I have a very important work meeting. I'm sorry, we can meet later and talk. The man looked at the girl carefully. The facial features looked familiar to him. Oh shit, he cursed. If Emily leaves, I won't see her again. And I'd really like to talk to her. So be it. Emily, wait. He jumped up and ran after the woman. Honestly, I'm so happy to see you. What about your meeting? She smiled. Can we meet another day? No, Emily, do I need you now? Unexpectedly, Jacob said. Emily, my family is falling apart, or rather, has already fallen apart. Adriana has a lover. How did you know that? She asked with interest. Did she tell you that? No, Jacob lowered his head. Someone sent me photos and videos of her with him at our villa. They were there. Well, anyway, you understand, Jacob, it was, I said calmly to Emily. The man didn't understand what she meant at first. He wanted her to explain it to him, but then it came to him. Emily did. You're in shock, he pronounced. But why? Jacob, I've loved you for years. The woman was embarrassed, but Adriana went on principle. She always hated me. She always felt like someone might have chosen me over her. It didn't just hurt her, it drove her crazy. So she knew about it all along. The man said with pale lips. Yes, Emily replied. She played you on purpose to hurt me, and when her wedding in Europe broke up, she took the opportunity to psychologically kill me. Jacob, her father could have chosen someone else for her at that point. They only needed you for a couple years to shut her down and embarrass her back. Her father was going to marry her off to someone else anyway. So he only asked father then because they needed the right man at that moment. The doctor paled for a while. They were planning to use me from the beginning and then throw me away, the woman said sadly, and they found a replacement very quickly. In Italy, she seduced a guy who was the son of rich people. Or rather, as I understand it, they all planned it together. Kevin was married to an Italian woman at the time, and his parents disowned him for it. Things worked out with Adriana, and about a year ago, he finally got a divorce. Jacob, his and Adriana's wedding had been planned for a long time. God, I'm such a fool. the doctor's head in his hands. I naively believed in their good intentions. I had hoped to the end that Adriana would accept me. But why didn't she file for divorce right away? She had her own personal reasons. Emily replied and stroked her daughter's head. I would never have gotten involved in any of this. And I apologize to you, Jacob, but Jacob, do you remember the day you got drunk and came over? Oh, and I was really drunk then. The man sighed. The only thing I remember is getting in the car, and that was it. I had a fight with myself that day, the interviewee began, but I couldn't fly out that night because there were no tickets. I was wandering down the street by the courtyard. Suddenly, I saw your car and stopped you. I realized you were drunk. You were going with Adriana to confront her. You were going to tell her everything. By some miracle, I talked you down, and we drove to your house. But at one point you stopped and started hitting on me. We got out of the car. You thought I was Adriana. I tried to get away from you, but you caught me, Jacob. I did it on my own. It was a conscious decision because I loved you. Are you saying that there was something between us? I don't believe my ears, the doctor interjected. Yes, she replied shortly, and I have proof. I can even show it to you. What kind of proof? In shock, asked Jacob. He was making an effort to believe all this. Sophia put her arm around the girl. Your daughter Ethan Candle became dizzy from overexertion and began to faint. Jacob slapped the women on his cheeks. Jacob, wake up. The doctor opened his eyes. Standing in front of him was an agitated Emily. Sophia was looking intently into his eyes. I'm sorry, it was probably too much even for me. Coming to his senses, the man said, God, I have a daughter. Who would have thought it? He whispered. Jacob, what's pregnant with Kevin? Emily finished her story. She said that you would always think it was your child, even when you divorced her. So she needed time for you to get used to the role. But what was all that for? Screamed the doctor. I'm beginning to think she's mentally disturbed. Maybe, replied Emily calmly. She wished I'd never gotten you. In her dreams, you were supposed to chase her around like a dog. And it didn't matter that she had another husband now. You were supposed to remain loyal to her to the end and grateful for your supposed child. Jacob Ethan realized that he needed to be alone and process all of this. He had said goodbye to his mother then, without understanding why, but he wanted very much to take the girl in his arms and kiss her. But he restrained his impulse. For several days, Jacob woke up. Finally, the whole mosaic came together and he was able to decide what to do next. After work, he took his wife and they drove to her father's house. Jacob, what's the matter? Adriana protested. Couldn't this wait until tomorrow? No, he answered briefly. I've waited too long as it is. They pulled up in front of the big house. Jacob asked everyone to gather in the living room. James looked at him unhappily. So let's begin. Spoke calmly to his son-in-law. Let's probably go from the very end. And carries a child by another man. The father and his wife turned pale. He realized that nothing more could be hidden. Soon you will perform the wedding of your daughter Adriana to Kevin, with whom she is pregnant, the doctor continued. You, James, never wanted me to marry Adriana. But when trouble came to you, you just used me as a staging post. God judge you for that. And now you. Adriana. He looked at his wife. This is the last day we'll be together. Tomorrow I'll divorce you. But for all the suffering you've caused Emily, don't expect to find happiness. You're incapable of love. And there will be someone who will treat you the way you've treated me and everyone else. And I'll tell you honestly, if you hadn't gotten involved, we might be happy together by now. I know Sophia is my daughter. For the first time in her life, Adriana didn't know what to say to her. Everything Jacob had said was true. Her war that she had set up with them had so consumed her entire life that she had no chance of winning from the start. There was complete silence in the living room. There was no point in lying or denying it. And if you try to smear me in any way or make up any sordid stories, James, I'm talking to you personally. I have footage of your daughter frolicking in our villa with her lover. That will be all. I do hope our paths never cross again. The man ran out of his father-in-law's house and went to his house. His mind was racing, but Jacob realized that he needed to get some sleep. He took a sleeping pill and fell asleep immediately. The next day, when he came home from work, his ex-wife's things were gone. What a petty idiot James is, Jacob said in shock, looking at the fact that the furniture in his mind had been removed. He must be getting back at me. Let him take everything. I'll still have the walls. And they're mine. I bought this house with my own money. He can't take it away from me. The next day was supposed to be his day off. He jumped back in the car, set the navigator, and followed its instructions. It must have been about 3 hours when he finally saw the name he wanted. Where is the old house of Kate's parents, James' ex-wife? Asked Jacob, sitting behind the yard of the old man. Yes, on the next street over. He looked curiously at the stranger and showed him his hand. Jacob stopped his car where his grandfather told him someone ran out of the house. Daddy is here, Sophia shouted joyfully. Daddy, I love you so much, and I love you. He picked the girl up in his arms and started kissing her. God, how have I missed you all this time? I always felt inside that you existed. Jacob, hi. I'm outside. But how are you doing? She smiled. Now I'm doing well. Looked Jacob, the woman intently in the eyes. Now I have a real family, and I will not let you or Sophia go anywhere else.